Hey guys, welcome back to our channel, as you seen in title and thumbnail. In this video we are going to see, what if Ash foguht two-winged gods? This is part 2. And for more comment down your thoughts and like share, also don't forget to check out author of this story named, Northbridge Town by Mechanical Infection. All details in description. Exactly 1 hour had passed. The sun was setting into the mountains which faced the north side of Alexandria City. The cold air and rain added a more strange feeling to the atmosphere. It had been raining for days now and it almost felt as if the city was drowning. Skyscrapers invaded most of the downtown area, huge buildings which belonged to major corporations could be seen as far as the eye could see. This was definitely not Northbridge Town. Not as clean or as calm anyway. There were a lot of people walking the sidewalks and there were dozens of cars on the streets, several garbage cans were placed by some light poles, but people mostly used the sidewalks to throw their trash away and instead. In a cleaner environment of the city was a huge building made of strange cement which helped give it an old look and feeling. It was the Alexandria City Museum. There was a huge sign with bold red letter that read, "Sorry, we are closed for repairs." Old man Petrov stopped his car at the front of the museum and got out. He walked up to the front door and looked back at the street as if looking to see if he wasn't being followed by anyone. He opened the door slightly and walked inside. Once inside he looked about and saw nothing out of place. There were wax figures resembling several legendary Pokémon in the middle of the room. On the wall were paintings of extinct Pokémon and on the roof were several skeletons of flying Pokémon. The lights were off so he had a bit of a hard time looking about in the darkening room. His eyesight was not what it used to be so he walked slowly and carefully about. As he passed by a wax lapras he heard a strange sound and when he turned around he came face to face with Ariscordia. This time she was wearing a long black dress that dragged a little at the end, it had no sleeves, just 2 thin straps. She had on some high-heeled sandals which had leather laces that were wrapped around her legs. She crossed her arms and leaned on the lapras and looked at Petrov seriously. "I thought he had been locked up. He was, but Officer Jenny let him back out. How the hell was I supposed to know that? You should pay more attention to your work." "Oh, excuse me. I didn't realize flaring about town in the shadows of the night, parading around and shape-shifting into your rival was considered a job." Ariscordia walked up to Petrov and pointed her index finger right at his face and said, "I was making it seem as if he was the one who destroyed the hospital so they could lock him up, you idiot." Petrov backed down and looked at her. He had no sense of respect for her, but he did know not to get on her bad side for he knew what she was capable of. "Why on earth did you take the girl?" Ariscordia chuckled and said as she passed her hand on the lapras wax figure and said, "For insurance and a way to get rid of our dear friend." Petrov looked at her in question and doubt so he said, "I don't think I understand completely. I gave Ash 2 choices, he would either join me or he would die. He chose death so we'll give it to him." Back in Northbridge Town Officer Jenny explained all that had happened to Tanya and Marco. Both of them were in shock to hear what a man like Petrov had done. Both were angry and disappointed with reason of course seeing as how Petrov's actions were nothing short of treason. As everyone sat down in the living room the phone rang. And everyone turned their heads towards it as Marco picked it up but before putting it to his ear he pushed the speaker phone mode button so everyone could listen in since he knew it was Petrov on the other line. "Petrov. Marco. How are you?" "Enough chit-chat Petrov, where is the girl?" "Ah, yes, lovely girl. Bit angry though. But then again who wouldn't be if they were tied up and locked in the janitor's closet?" Max had also become both angry and concerned. He got up off the sofa and ran to the phone and yelled into his nurse. Joy held him back. "You hurt my sister and you'll be sorry." "No." RSE Joy managed to sit him back down and calm him but old man Petrov just laughed and said, "Worry not, boy, she will not be harmed I promise you that." Unless, Petrov remained silent for a few seconds. But in those few seconds tension had built up inside each and every person in that room. Then Petrov carried on, "I propose a trade. The girl for the boy." As soon as he said that Ash snarled and everyone looked at him. They had been put in a very dangerous position. In the back of his mind an idea lit up and Ash grinned and came forward to the phone and said, "Just name the time and place and we have a deal." "Excellent. Meet me tomorrow in Alexandria City, the corner of 5th and 7th at noon. I'll call on the doctor's cell phone for further details." Petrov hung up the phone and all looked at Ash in question. They all thought it was risky and just plain crazy, but all Ash could do was grin as he fully developed the plan in his mind. 2 hours before noon everyone was ready to go. Tan, Ya and Marco, being a nurse and a doctor, could not just put their jobs aside, but they trusted they could handle matters without them. Max was eager to make the switch, but Marco stopped him by putting his hand on his shoulder and said, "I think it'd be best if you stay behind." "What? Why me?" Brock walked up to them and said. "He's right, Max. This is pretty dangerous and you could get hurt." Max R.E. moved Marco's hand and said as he looked at both seriously, "May is my sister. So I'm going whether it's dangerous or not." Ash had heard the commission, so he walked over to him and said, "Look, I can. You're worried and scared, but I promise we'll get May back safe and sound." Max chalked up and a tear fell down his cheek as he looked at the three of them and said, "Promise." Ash smiled and said as Pikachu climbed up on his shoulder, "Promise." Pikachu lifted its small paw and also agreed by saying, "Hi, Pikachu." Max stood down and calmed down a little bit. He remembered how Ash and Brock always seemed to be able to get both May and he out of trouble, so he put his complete trust in them both and agreed. Shortly after arriving in Alexandria City, they let Dante, Karen and CJ guide them to the city since they knew it like the back of their hands. They were now 45 minutes from noon, so they made a few last-minute arranges. The corner of 5th and 7th had several buildings around it, and one of them was the museum run by Petrov. Next to the museum was also a large plaza with a beautiful fountain shooting water from well-done statues. Part of the plan involved Ash using a lot of psychic energy, which, sadly, was a type difficult for him to tame. He had learned to control all types, but psychic was difficult, and up to that day he couldn't fully control it, but he went on with the plan either way. After everything was set, Marco's cell phone rang, so Officer Jenny answered it. "Petrov, is that you?" "Yes. Listen very carefully, I will be watching you from above, so anything you do I will see. Have the boy walk up to the fountain in the plaza and wait till the girl reaches the fountain. As soon as both are standing there, the boy will move towards the museum and there he will be escorted by Iris, and as soon as Iris shows up the girl can get away. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear." Both hung up and went with the plan. Up high on the rooftop of the museum stood Petrov as he watched down below at the plaza. He saw Ash appear from out of the bank they were hiding in and walked up to the fountain. Strangely, he only wore his black shirt and not tucked in as he always had it, and of course the blue jeans. Petrov saw as he lowered his hat and walked on. He lifted his gaze and saw another young man walk out of the bank. This one was dressed differently. He had on black bag, shirt and a black overcoat and some black rock boots and a pair of black Arnett sunglasses. The young man walked towards the mall, so Petrov gave no real thought to it and kept an eye on Ash. Once he reached the fountain, May was released and she slowly walked up to the fountain. In that walk towards the fountain, which seemed like miles, she wondered how they were going to get out of that trouble. Once she reached the fountain, she tried to look at Ash, but he covered his face with the hat. She wondered why, but she didn't give it much thought. May looked around frantically to see if she saw Petr or Ariscordia in the area and said in a low whisper, "What's going on? What are we going to do?" Ash didn't say anything, he just lifted his index finger and placed it over his mouth and shushed her, always making sure the hat covered his face. May was all too confused to do anything much. Ariscordia walked out of the museum and stood in the doorway, which signaled that May should keep walking towards the bank. She moved on, and as soon as she walked into the bank she was pulled inside by Nurse Joy. Ariscordia walked towards Ash, and as soon as she was right behind him she wrapped her arms around him and leaned in to whisper something in his ear. "You're dead meat, catch him." He began to laugh, and for some reason Ariscordia noticed he was a bit taller than before. She backed up a little and looked around. All he did was laugh, and when she turned him around and removed his hat she came to the surprise that it was Dante in disguise. "What the hell is going on here?" Dante grinned and began to sing something. "There hasn't been an evening like." Ariscordia looked at him confused, and suddenly she heard a very familiar voice from behind her continuing that rest of the song. "This is what they wanted, always to feel hunted." Ariscordia slowly turned around and saw the real Ash Ketchum standing right behind her, aiming a net gun at her. The young man Petrov saw getting out of the bank and heading towards the mall was in fact Ash, and the boy heading towards the fountain was Dante. Anger rose from inside of Ariscordia, and before she could even blink, Ash fired 2 nets which wrapped Aru. Her, and she fell to the ground cursing at him. Ash could do nothing more than laugh wickedly and watched as the mighty Ariscordia struggled to free herself from the net. He kept laughing at her to free herself, and walked up to her and placed his left foot on her shoulder and said as he lowered the sunglasses. Well, this has got to be a little embarrassing for you, Maris. Untie me, you son of a bitch. Nah, I think I'll just leave you tied up for a while. He grinned and kneeled over next to her. She hissed at him and he just smiled once more, and she said, "Let me go. Stop being a little shit and untie me so I can kill you." Ash rose up, and while still looking at her he said in a serious tone, "Why end it so soon? I'm just starting to have fun." His smile only monog ed to anger her further, but Ash just fed off her anger. At the roof of the museum, Petrov saw the fall of their plan, but the old man had one last trick up his sleeve. That net that wrapped Ariscordia as especially designed to capture Pokémon but not capture them like a regular trainer would. The net just subdued the Pokémon and prevented the creature from using any attack, since both Ariscordia and Ash had the same traits of a Pokémon. They too were affected by this net. Petrov also had a similar gun like the one in Ash's hands, so he aimed it at him and shot him with a net. After he saw Ash go down, he released a Skarmory from a Pokeball, and as soon as the giant metallic bird materialized, Petrov climbed on it and swooped down right next to Ariscordia. Once in the ground, he took a switchblade and cut Ariscordia loose. Once she was up, she looked at Ash, who was snarling at them, and kicked him and said something in a strange language. Officer Jenny and the others saw what had happened, so they ran out of the bank and raced to the fountain in the plaza. Before they could reach the plaza, Ariscordia picked Ash up and took the switchblade from Petrov and put it to Ash's neck. They all stopped dead in their tracks, and Ariscordia laughed out loud and said, "Now that things are as they should have been, we'll take our leave. I suggest you people do the same." Petrov and Ariscordia backed away and they dragged Ash with them. Afraid of what they might do to him, Pikachu let out its most powerful thunder attack, and as the powerful thunder raced down on them, Ariscordia lifted her arm and created a barrier, and the thunder was stopped cold by it. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen, Pikachu, Brock and May watched as Ash was dragged away and into the museum. As soon as the doors closed, they reacted and began to panic. Dante cursed out loud, and Officer Jenny shook her head in disappointment and said, "What are we gonna do?" Karen was baffled by how they were reacting. When May was taken, Ash came up with a plan and didn't panic or make it seem like it would be hopeless to rescue her. Karen walked in front of the crowd and said as she looked at each of them, "I can't believe you guys. You're making it seem as though there is nothing we could do to get him back. We have to do something, and we have to do it now." CJ didn't know Ash at all, but he certainly knew from what he do. Saint saw that he was gutsy and determined, so he stood next to Karen and said, "Yeah, when she was kidnapped he didn't mop around. Kid took action and came up with a seriously killer plan. You ask me, I say that dude has guts." After hearing Karen and CJ, the others were encouraged and acknowledged what they just heard and came up with what they hoped would be a foolproof plan. As night fell on the city, Ariscordia had tied Ash to a chair in Petrov's office. The chair was white and made of leather but had a lot of filling to prevent back problems. The office itself wasn't a big show, it was kind of small. It was painted white and had several elegant paintings on the walls, mostly consisting of the legendary Lugia. The desk, which was made of expensive oak wood, was polished and very neat. There as only a computer and a notebook on the surface, the desk also had several drawers which were locked. Ash had been tied up for some hours, which was starting to irritate him to no end, not to mention that his time was being wasted only infuriated him beyond words. During that time all he could do was try and come up with some sort of escape plan, but all he thought of was soon ruined by Petrov's constant visits. Finally, late at night, the door opened and inside walked Ariscordia. It seemed every time they ran into each other she was wearing something else. This time she was wearing a long white dress with a pretty serious cleavage, but she only managed to disgust him for her behavior. The dress was in a tube style and was pretty tight, it had no distinctive designs. It was just as pure white as a cloud racing through the sky at dawn. He scoffed at the thought of the dress color. He found it rather amusing and ironic, for pure was the last thing she was. She walked in silently, the only thing that could be heard was the sound of her heels hitting the ground as she walked inside. Ever since they had kidnapped Ash, Ariscordia only walked into the office once, this being her second time. The first time she tried to persuade him into joining them in their scheme to take over and create mayhem. His answer was short and simple, no. Ariscordia was mad with that answer, but in her cocky nature she somehow thought she could break him. She did not want to admit it, but Ash presented a major problem for her, so she would try all she could to turn him. She swiftly walked up to the desk and looked at him for a few seconds as if exploring all possibilities in which she could turn him. Torture even crossed her mind, but that would just feed his hate for her. Ariscordia sat at the edge of the desk and crossed her legs. As she did, the left side of the dress revealed a cut that split and her legs were out in the open. She smiled wickedly, but he simple Snara heard him snarling, so she laughed lightly and said as she smiled at him, "This seems like right out of a James Bond movie, don't ya think?" Ash thought of a million things and insults to direct towards her, but he knew the more complex and colorful the insult, the more kicks she would get out of bothering him. So his reply was short, simple, but still stingy. "Bite me." Ariscordia lifted an eyebrow at the comment and simply smiled. Her smile, of course, was a front for her true feelings. Deep inside she would have loved nothing more than to throw him off the building's roof, but she kept her cool. "I'm going to give you one more chance. Join me and I promise you won't regret it. What do you think of that?" Ash stood quiet for a moment and actually looked like he was thinking it over in his mind. Ariscordia was having feelings of victory within her, but she looked indifferent outside as not to give away the idea that she was winning. Ash leaned in as much as the ropes would let him and looked her dead in the eyes and said, why don't you jump up, my?" She knew exactly how he was going to end that sentence, so before he could even breathe the last word she balled up her fist and hit him as hard as she could. Her hand had landed hard on the left side of his mouth, which resulted in a broken lip. He kept still and his blood built up inside his mouth. He spit it out and then looked at Ariscordia with burning eyes indicating nothing more but fury and hate. The same was emitting from Ariscordia. Both just stared at each other for several minutes, but then Ash broke the silence and said, "That is the last time you pull something like that." Ariscordia leaned in rapidly and put her hands on the seat's armrests and said as she looked at him fiercely, "Then don't make me do it. That is no way to talk to a lady." With those words, Ash couldn't help but say in a serious and cold tone, "A lady? Where? All I see is you." Ariscordia was now angrier than ever and just wanted to scream her lungs out, but she remained calm and cool. And said as she passed her pinky on his bloody lip, "You're seconds from dead." Ash felt no real threat from that comment, but he remained quiet and just looked at her with raw, seething anger in his eyes. All he did was growl at her while she walked out of the office and locked the door. As soon as she locked the door, she turned around and came face to face with Old Man Petrov. She walked down towards the main hall, but then stopped and said, "He won't join us." Petrov chuckled and said as he walked up to her, "I told you he wouldn't join us. The boy obviously is incorruptible." "Whatever. Just have you found the white sphere yet?" "No. I have the black one, which is yours, but the white one is still missing. I'm not even sure if they know where it is." "Well, we need to find it." Ariscordia said no more and simply walked on. Once she was near the front door, she said out loud, "And as soon as you find it, kill him. And be prepared for a rescue from his friends." Around 1:23 a.m. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy and the rest snuck to the back alley of the museum. Alexandria City was very active with all sorts of people during the day, but at night the population varied between teenagers and young adults who were more active during the night. Their plan was not one concocted by professionals, but they hoped it was enough to safely get Ash out of enemy hands and safely back into theirs. Officer Jenny knew the museum like the back of her hand, and her being a cop helped in the ordeal of trying to get into a building by force. First thing they did was secure the area. Officer Jenny knew the museum had a broken window that only Marcos, Petrov and she knew about. On the second floor of the corner there was a window that if pushed inside it would open easily. Dante released a Crobat from a Pokeball and whispered an order at the bat Pokemon. "K, here's what I want you to do. Fly up to that window and push it inside, it should open easily. Once inside, check the area and make sure no one is nearby." "Got it, Lestat." Lestat acknowledged its trainer's orders and did as it was told. Lestat flew high up to the window and pushed it open. It did as easily as Dante said it would be. Once inside, Lestat checked every corner of the room. It was the janitor's room, so the only things inside were mops and detergents. It saw some rope on the floor that had been cut with either scissors or claws. That was the room where May had been kept, and the door was slightly open. Lestat flew out and flew to the roof where it hid amongst the shadows and looked down on the hallway. Everything was quiet and calm, so the little bat Pokémon thought the area was safe. It quickly flew to the window and chattered lively down to its trainer, letting them know it was safe to continue. Officer Jenny took out a hook from a backpack she was carrying, and Lestat flew down and grabbed the hook. It flew back up and tossed the hook on the floor. Officer Jenny pulled the rope until it wouldn't budge at all, indicating that the hook had gotten caught on something. One by one they all climbed the rope and reached the room. Once they were inside, they had to find Ash but avoid running into Petrov or Ariscordia. Figured so many people running around looking for the same person would save them a lot of time, but at the same time there was the risk of losing one or getting caught, so it was decided that Officer Jenny, Dante and CJ were the ones that would go and look for him. Pikachu had tagged along with them and refused to stay behind, so it crept alongside of Dante and looked around as well. By the look of things, the second floor was empty, but they had to be careful no matter what. As they crept along the hallway, they ran into some elevators and a staircase. Obviously the elevators would make too much noise, so they went down the stairs. Officer Jenny was the first in line, so she carefully scanned the area for any signs of Petrov or Ariscordia. Truth be told, Officer Jenny was worried and a bit frightened. She always was when dealing with situations that involved innocent people getting hurt or worse. She swallowed her feelings and concentrated in the task at hand. Dante and CJ had a 2GH history of break-ins and robbery from a former handful of friendships they shouldn't have made, and with Officer Jenny with them it wouldn't turn out so bad. They ran into the middle of the first floor and saw some paintings. Figures, and as they looked up they saw the huge skeletons on the roof. They snuck around carefully. As they searched they heard a door closing and heard voices. Officer NY hid behind a huge wax figure of an Ampharos, Dante hid behind a sculpture of a Lugia, and CJ hid behind a door. Officer Jenny and Dante saw Ariscordia walking out of a room talking on a cell phone, so they listened in. Now, is that going to be a problem? No, I didn't think so. Just get your team over to Alexandria City and we'll have no problems. Meanwhile CJ kept as quiet as possible, and his ear on the door to see if he could pick up any sounds, but as he waited he was startled by someone's voice whispering something. Lucky for you, I'm the only one here. CJ quickly turned around and saw Ash tied up on the chair. He exhaled in relief and walked towards him and said, "Oh, man, you scared the crap out of me." Didn't realize I was scary." CJ calmed down and walked over to Ash and untied him. Meanwhile, Officer Jenny and Dante seized the opportunity now that Ariscordia had left to look around. Dante reached for the doorknob of the room she had just come out of, but before his hand could touch the doorknob they heard faint footsteps behind them. They quickly turned around fearing that they had been caught, but ran into CJ and Ash. After a brief reunion and the usual questionnaire of whether anyone was injured or needed anything, they began to creep back to the stairs that led to the second floor. Hopeful that no one had seen them, they slowly but rather quickly ran up the stairs to head out of the city and try and find a way to stop Ariscordia and her malignant plans. As Dante, who was these foot on the last step, they heard a series of loud noises. They looked forward and saw one of the windows of the hallway and saw a metal plate rise up from the window's frame. They frantically looked at all windows and saw the same thing happening. Someone must have activated the defense system that would lock down every single window and door in order to keep anything in or out depending on the situation. Officer Jenny suddenly remembered the rest of the group and quickly ran towards where they had left them, followed by Ash, Dante and CJ. Once they were in front of the janitor's room, they saw the door wide open and no signs of anyone there. Dante became worried about his sister and looked around. He noticed that the defective window hadn't been blocked by the metal plate, so he ran to it and looked out of it. There was no one in the alley, so they presumed they had been caught, and they were right. All throughout the museum they heard Ariscordia talking through the PA system and said, "Looking for something. After she said that, she began to laugh out loud. So they all ran back to the first floor and saw Petrov with several of those shadow Pokemon surrounding Nurse Joy, Karen, Brock and May. Ariscordia walked out of the control room, which was at the back, and said as she approached them, well, it seems that every time you guys try to pull something I always seem to win. Now, we have ourselves here a bit of a situation. Those of you on he stares walk over to the rest of the group. No one made a single slight movement or said anything except for Ash, whose answer was a threatening snarl. Ariscordia was not in a good mood, so she snapped at her fingers, and a shadow Pokemon that looked like an Absol stepped forward and walked slowly towards May and Karen. Ash quickly stepped forward, and then the rest of them did the same. Petrov smiled and Ariscordia went to another door. She opened it and looked at Ash seriously and coldly. Well, Ashy boy, since you so refused to join us, well, you know how it goes. I warned you what would happen if you got in my way. And you know what? You're in my way. Stop playing around and let's get this over with. Petrov barked at Ariscordia's measly wordplay, which was beginning to annoy him. Dia looked back at Petrov seriously and rolled her eyes. She grabbed Ash by the neck and the others stepped forward in protest, afraid she might do something to harm him. Ariscordia aimed her right hand at the group, and a small sphere of burning red and yellow colors appeared inches from her palm. Everyone calmed down, but the tension began to build up as Ariscordia threatened them. Ash of course was concerned for his friends, so he did all he could to calm everyone down. Look, guys, it's fine. Aris let Aim go. Ariscordia chuckled and said as she lowered her arm. Oh, don't worry. They'll be fine, as long as they're smart enough to stay away. Now, you my friend are another story. She snapped her fingers and the shadow Pokemon walked towards Ash. Ariscordia pointed her finger towards the door behind Ash. He got the idea and went in through the door. As he stood on the doorstep and looked down to see some stairs leading down to a room. Even though it was pitch black, he was able to see in the dark and realized he was walking down to the basement. He walked down the stairs slowly. His mind at the moment was completely blank. No ideas for an escape. No witty comebacks or insults, just an empty mind remarkably at peace. Once he reached the floor, he saw a shadow in the shape of a human on the floor. He knew it was Ariscordia, but he kept quiet and waited to see what she would say. It's a shame, a real shame. Of all the people who have touched the white sphere, you have been the cutest. Flattery, shyness and even a hint of embarrassment would be the emotions he would have felt after hearing a comment like that, but at the moment he felt nothing. It was as if every human emotion had been drained out of him and emptiness replaced them all. All he did was slowly turn around and look at her with emptiness in his eyes. Ariscordia sighed and pointed her finger at the wall of the basement. Ash looked to where she was pointing and saw a screen with huge red and bold numbers counting down from 1 minute. He looked back at her and she said in a low tone, I will miss those pretty brown eyes. Ash scoffed and gave her the finger as he turned towards the wall. Ariscordia raised an eyebrow and said under her breath, how colorful. Ariscordia quickly closed the door and then locked it. She snapped her fingers and the shadow Pokemon disappeared into thin air and Petrov and she managed to get the group out of the museum. Once they were outside, Petrov locked the front door and ran to the other side of the street where Ariscordia was tying up Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen, Brock and May's hands together with flex cuffs. Petrov rushed over as fast as he could, and as soon as his foot touched the sidewalk, the museum blew up. The explosion was so great and powerful that the group fell down from the force emitting from it. Pikachu, who had hid when Petrov and Ariscordia found the group, stood across the street in awe and looking at the fire the explosion left in horror. Tears built up and rapidly fell down its cheeks as it yelled out, Pi Ka Pi. No. That was the response from the group as they gathered themselves and saw the museum lit up on fire from the explosion. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Karen and May were overwhelmed with tears from the slaughter they had just witnessed. An innocent victim, another guiltless life taken by the evil of the spheres, and the worst part was that Ariscordia had no one to stop her. As they watched in both sadness and despair, the fire wildly moved around in a deathly dance of death and destruction, eating away at everything in its path. Ariscordia stepped forward and looked at the group and saw their faces. She could smell the fear coming from them. Ariscordia was not one to care for anyone or even feel anything for no living creature. She stared for any signs of Ash, but after 3 minutes she gave up and turned to the group and said with a huge smile on her face, "Okie dokie then, unless you want to be turned into ashes, you'll do as I say." After hearing that all they wanted to do was beat Ariscordia with the first object they could get, but unfortunately more lost lives would mean nothing to her, so they agreed to follow them. Ariscordia walked toward Petrov and said, "I'll take them back. Meanwhile you find the white sphere and get the black sphere back from your place. You have 2 hours. Right away. Pay." Petrov got in his car and drove off in a hurry. Meanwhile, before Ariscordia moved away, she turned to the fire-lit museum and said as she walked away, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust." Ariscordia then ed towards the group, who was still stung from the loss of a good friend and the only hope to stopping Ariscordia and her plans. As the group walked away quietly and mournfully, Pikachu stayed behind and looked into the fire with tears in its eyes. As sad as the little yellow mouse was, it couldn't find any strength to move or do anything. As Pikachu looked deeply into the fire, it recalled all the times it spent with its trainer and best friend, every encounter with Team Rocket, all the legendary Pokémon it got the privilege to meet, and all those times they spent together and had fun. With Ash gone, Ariscordia was free to do whatever her twisted mind wanted to do. She knew if she would lay out a massive attack, the police department and other authorities would take action, not to mention the military base at the foot of the mountains on the north side of Alexandria City. Her first action was the creation of 1,000 shadow Pokémon ready and willing to do her bidding. Her second action was releasing all her shadow minions into the city. Ariscordia knew the police department would interfere, so she personally headed over to the police department. The officer Jenny in charge of the Alexandria City Police Department had just come back from a robbery in a jewelry store. Like Northbridge Town, there was a robbery or a break-in-entry every 2 hours, so Officer Jenny was a very busy woman. Officer Jenny sat at her desk and relaxed after a long 3 hours running after some kids who were responsible for the robbery at the jewelry store. Her relaxation did not last. Another cop came to her and said, "Excuse me, Officer Jenny, we got a call about a huge explosion over at Mr. Zimmer's museum." "Oh, 5 minutes. That's all I want, just 5 miserable minutes. Well, it's part of the job." Officer Jenny and the cop chuckled, and as she rose from the chair, the front door burst open and Ariscordia walked inside. She stood at the front door and smiled wickedly at all the people inside of the building. Officer Jenny walked up to her and said, "May I help you?" Ariscordia remained quiet and simply chuckled at the officer, who only became annoyed. Officer Jenny looked at her and said once more, "May I help you, young lady?" Once again Ariscordia's reply was silence. Officer Jenny had been around criminals for far too long to not notice the look on Ariscordia's face. "Something, and Officer Jenny told her to be on the lookout with this strange girl, so she swiftly moved her hands on her hips to where she kept her gun. Ariscordia saw the tension building up and decided to act before they would do something to ruin her plans, which up to date were going perfectly well. Ariscordia laughed and said, "Think you have what it takes to stop me, copper?" Officer Jenny found the statement rather threatening, so she drew her gun on Ariscordia and the other officers did the same. As they aimed their weapons at her, Ariscordia couldn't help but laugh at their efforts. As much as enjoyed toying around with her victims, she had a tight schedule to pay close attention to. Ariscordia swiftly lifted her right arm up and faced her right hand at the crowd of officers before her. "On. See ye again," she smiled, and a pink and purple sphere formed just inches from the middle of her palm. Within seconds the sphere burst into a soft-colored purple and pink dust that quickly and swiftly spread throughout the police department. Every single person in that building fell to the floor and went into a deep sleep that could not be disturbed by anything. Ariscordia smiled wickedly and went out of the building and on to her next task. The military base would not be a problem if they were to be kept outside of the city limits, so she made sure nothing could get in, but she had to make sure there was no one in the city. Ariscordia stood in the middle of the street, causing several cars to come to a screeching halt. She ignored the drivers as they got out of their cars and began to complain and tell her to move. Ariscordia simply looked up at the sky and concentrated. As several people stopped and looked at her, thousands of shadow Pokémon emerged from out of the thin air. For a minute Why Thing was silent and people were only curious as to what was happening, but as soon as the shadows stopped appearing they spread out and began to attack the people from Alexandria City. The shadows ran about chasing, biting, slashing and attacking anyone and anything in their way. As Ariscordia made sure her shadow minions were up and doing their job, she quietly walked away and headed towards the National Bank, Alexandria City's largest and tallest building. The bank had over 1,200 rooms and it consisted of 96 floors. Everything was going according to plan, and wonderfully at that, the shadows managed to clear the city by the time Ariscordia reached the bottom of the bank, and as she watched the last few people run away she stood very still at the front doors of the bank and once again went into a deep concentration. This time the activity was right at the borders of the city. A wall of 75 feet in height rose from the ground, creating a white see-through barrier which meant to keep both people and Pokemon out of Alexandria City. After the wall was created she smiled and looked up at the colossal building before her. The door itself stood 25 feet high and was made of glass, as was the rest of the building. As a proud warlord after a flawless victory she walked through those doors with pride overwhelming her, completely unaware that her plans could perhaps tilt for the worst in the blink of an eye. Trapped in cages were Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, Karen, CJ, Brock and May. They remained silent and full of hopelessness as they watched the hands of an old and dusty clock move against them. Some of them sat on the cold, hard steel floor and others leaned on the steel bars. With no way to contact anyone they had given up any type of hope. But just as things were looking so gloomy and filled with an all too familiar feeling of doom, May's backpack began to move about on its own. CJ saw this and warned everyone. As they stood there looking at the backpack it continued to move about, and suddenly a burst of energy erupted from it and an adorable but mischievous Skitty materialized before them. Nah, nah, nah. Those were the sounds that Skitty made as it jumped around gleefully. May above all was overjoyed to see her Skitty. She saw this as the perfect opportunity to get them out. May stretched her arms out through the space between the bars and said as Skitty jumped into her arms. Skitty, am I glad to see you. Nah, said the tiny Pokemon as it returned the hug to its trainer, and May said as she lifted her index finger pointing out at an open-air vent. Okay, Skitty, I need you to go in there and escape from the building and get some help as fast as you can. Skitty looked towards the air vent, and before anyone could say another word the kitten Pokemon ran towards the vent. Normally Skitty was a very hyper and playful Pokemon, but it sensed great fear and concern coming from May and the other people with her, so it decided to act as quickly as possible. That didn't stop it from hoping that May would play with it when all else was once again all right. Skitty stood on the entrance of the air vent and looked back at its trainer. It saw the look on Ma's face and it was rushed from inside to hurry and find some help. Before leaving it nodded and ran into the cool air vent to try and find a way out of the building and find some help. May watched as her kitten Pokemon ran into the air vent. May trusted her Skitty and knew help was well on the way, but she did however say under her breath, "Good luck, Skitty." Meanwhile back at the top floor where all executives and VIPs of the bank met for meetings, Ariscordia made herself at home. The floor was a whole room which looked like a ballroom you would normally find in mansions and castles. The walls were painted a very soft tone of brown. There were glass windows on the north and south facing walls, and a large earthy tone carpet covered every inch of the room's floor. At the very end of the room, which faced the north side, there was a long wooden table, made out of wood and obviously very expensive. There were 27 chairs neatly tucked underneath the table. The chairs were made of the same material as the table and also looked rather expensive. Of all chairs there was one that was bigger and was located at the very end of the table. The chair's back faced the windows that overlooked the entire north side of Alexandria City. Almost 3 hours had passed since Ariscordia had sent Petrov on an errand and she was starting to get very uncomfortable with his tardiness. As she sat on the chair she looked out the window and down on the abandoned city, then and there she decided enough was enough. She snapped her fingers and a shadow in the shape of a Firo appeared before her. "Go and find the old man and make sure he gets here safe. We can't afford any mistakes." Just as the shadow Firo was about to take off, two Absol shadows walked in from the elevators with news. Both OWS sat next to each other, and right where the eyes should be there was a strange glow, and a transparent white square appeared out of the nowhere, and in the square she could see the front gate of Alexandria city known as Francine's Gate. The beauty of Aught, the only way in or out was by passing through Francine's Gate, which made it easy to control. At the gate Ariscordia had placed several shadows, and one of them was shaped like a Mewtwo. In the square she could see Petrov waiting to be let inside, as several shadow Pokémon were waiting for Ariscordia's orders. Ariscordia saw Petrov standing there. Ian stepped closer to the square and said, "What took you so long?" Down at the gate Petrov heard Ariscordia through the shadow Mewtwo. He backed up a little and said, "I had to find the bloody black K-sphere, but I'm afraid I have bad news as well." Ariscordia breathed in and said impatiently, "What now?" "I couldn't find the white sphere. I believe the kid had it with him, and well, he's nothing more than ashes by now." Petrov laughed as he said that last comment, but Ariscordia was only filling up with anger and frustration. The spheres were of magic, but they weren't indestructible. Ariscordia knew that by putting both spheres together she would be invincible and unstoppable. Now she had to face the harsh reality that not all her plans could come together as she had hoped they would. Rdia rubbed her forehead with the tip of her fingers and exhaled deeply. Petrov was beginning to think he would be left locked outside, and said as he faced the shadow Mewtwo, "Well, aren't you going to let me in?" Ariscordia had taken a few steps away from the square, but as soon as Petrov's voice had disturbed her train of thought she walked quickly towards the square and yelled out, "I should leave you out there to rot. I need both spheres, you moron. It's not my fault you weren't so careful. Oh, sure, let's blow the kid up to his next life and destroy the sphere. I didn't know. Besides, it was you how blew him up, not me. Whatever. Just go and see if you can find anything." Petrov had grown irritated. He was being blamed for something that he had opposed to in the first place. Petrov wanted power, not blood in his hands. Especially a child's blood. The only thing that gave comfort, if you could call it that, was that Ash wasn't exactly human anymore. Still, Petrov refused to go to the scene of a slaughter and said firmly, "No, I won't do it." Ariscordia turned and faced the square and said calmly, but her frustration was also noticeable in her voice, "What did you say?" "I said, no. There's no way in hell that I would go to the museum." "For what? The burned corpse of a child and a ruined building?" "I don't think so. How dare you defy me, old man? As I recall, I helped you of a major problem, and if I see no cooperation from your part you will be sorry." Petrov knew she meant it, and that problem she mentioned was too great for him to fall under once again, so he decided to do things her way for the time being. "Fine, let me in." "No. Change of plans. You go on over to the bank and head to the top floor, that's where I am. Stay there and wait for me while I check the site." Ariscordia snapped her fingers and the shadow Pokémon before her vanished. The Mewtwo down at Francine's Gate lifted its hands and made a swift movement of the wrist, and the gate opened and Petrov walked inside quietly. Meanwhile, Ariscordia teleported to the street at the foot of the bank. As she walked down the street towards the burned-down museum, a strange feeling came over her. She stopped in the middle of the road and looked around. Several trees that had been planted were restless because of the wind blowing. Several papers and pieces and pages of newspapers rolled down the streets and sidewalks as the wind hit them. It was a normal scene, but something about it felt wrong. Ariscordia looked up at the sky and saw dark clouds racing in the sky, announcing the arrival of a severe thunderstorm. Suddenly the air died down, the trees were frozen and the papers stopped cold and lay on the street lifeless. Nothing moved and an eerie silence fell upon the city. It was as if the Fae had been sucked out of the city and all was dead. Ariscordia felt a sudden feeling of rush and fear overwhelm her completely. She took 2 steps forward and looked about for any sign of Petrov, but for some unknown reason she took 1 step back, and at that very second a powerful and massive lightning struck right where she had put her foot down seconds before retrieving it. The impact was very strong, but the fright was what knocked her down and sat her down on the street. She looked up at the sky and saw the sky had been engulfed in darkness and the sun's rays could not get through. The whole sky had dark rain clouds and not a single drop of light got through. She hated how the sky looked. She preferred clear blue skies and sunny rays washing down on the earth. Suddenly the wind picked P again, but this time the wind blew past the city at a rapid speed and it was very, very cold. Ariscordia looked forward and saw a small figure walking towards her at a slow pace. She looked closely and saw it was Pikachu. Apparently it had stayed behind and wanted revenge for the murder of its trainer. Pikachu stopped when it was about 10 feet away and stood up on its hind legs and looked at Ariscordia with anger in its eyes. She could tell the little mouse meant business, but a mere Pikachu like that would only take one shot of any attack to finish it off. Ariscordia got up and pointed her R-ite index finger right at Pikachu, and a small white and pale yellow orb formed inches from the tip of her finger. Before she could launch a massive hyper beam attack, an aeroblast hit her right on her back and knocked her back down on the street face first. Ariscordia got back up quickly and looked around but could not find anyone or any Pokemon in the area. She looked to where Pikachu had been, but the little mouse was of the electric type and Aeroblast was an attack it could not learn, not to mention that it had disappeared. Ariscordia walked around looking everywhere in case she saw the small Pikachu or whatever hit her with the Aeroblast attack. As she cautiously walked down the street, she noticed an odd and chilling fog rolling on over the street. The fog seemed to have been coming from all directions. In only a matter of minutes the thick fog covered the streets, making it impossible to look at one's feet. Ariscordia was both cautious and jumpy, not knowing who was making these things happen. In the back of her mind she thought it was Ash, but at the same time she knew it couldn't be him since he was dead. As she looked around frantically, Pikachu popped up from an alley and launched a massive thunderbolt attack right at her. The attack hit her directly, but it was so minimal to her that it did no damage and she just stood there as if nothing had happened. That aroused more suspicions. The thunder that blasted in front of her some minutes before felt far too powerful to have come from that Pikachu. Ariscordia's eyes started to glow blood red and hundreds of shadows suddenly gathered around her. Pikachu hadn't counted on her summoning her minions so quickly, so it played it safe and hid away. Ariscordia had a bad feeling, but within her, she did not want to show any signs of doubt that would make her seem weak and unable. As soon as there was plenty of shadow Pokemon, her eyes flashed an eerie blood red and all shadows took off in different directions to handle the meddling Pikachu. As the shadows did their job, Ariscordia walked to the museum to see for herself if Ash was gone or not, for a part of her had her doubts. As she walked down the street she came face to face with a small Pikachu. As she looked at it her eyes widened, for that Pikachu in particular wasn't a normal Pikachu. Instead of an easy yellow, its entire body was black, the stripes on its back were now a soft pale gray and its eyes were an intense yellow that looked like its stare could pierce anything. It looked rather angry and ready to attack. The strange Pikachu tensed its muscles and as it did so black sparks of lightning wildly danced and paraded from its gray cheeks. While that was happening the clouds high above the Pikachu gathered and swirled above its head, letting out lightning of its own. The clouds suddenly dove down right in front of Ariscordia. Ariscordia was getting angry. She pointed her index finger at the strange Pikachu and fired a powerful Psybeam attack. The attack went right through the Pikachu, and right after the beam went through, the Pikachu disappeared. Ariscordia was very surprised at this and thought, a hallucination. How can this be? Her mind was crowded with a million thoughts. Thoughts of military involvement was the first, but they used Pokemon. People sneaking back into the city was also one, but there was no Pokemon that could create such a hallucination, and once more the possibility that Ash was still alive also took place within her thoughts. Ariscordia looked around, but the Pikachu had vanished into thin air. As she looked around, a small shadow Natu flew down and stood before her as a transparent square appeared before her. On the square she saw two human males standing at Francine's gate. They were both wearing uniforms. The uniforms consisted of a gray long-sleeved shirt with a large, red and bold R in the middle, some long gray pants and some boots. The men stood there waiting for orders from either Ariscordia or Petrov. Suddenly her fears washed away and she said calmly at the men, "It's about time you got here. Hurry inside, we have an intruder." The gate opened and dozens of team members walked inside the city. There were members from all known teams. Team Magma, Team Rocket and Team Aqua. Petrov knew they would need all the help they could get, so he made several calls, and members that weren't so loyal and or were rogues decided to get in on the action as Petrov promised power and money in return for their services. All teams walked up the main street and stopped as soon as they saw Ariscordia teleport right in front of them, and as she walked towards them she said, "Glad to see you made it. Now as you were told, we need to work to get what we want. You want power, money, and a team that will not let you down. Then get out there and earn it. There's an intruder loose in the city. Bring his or her head on a plate to me and you will be greatly rewarded." The crowd cheered and ran off in different directions. All teams equipped their members with Pokemon, but an earlier meeting some nights ago with Ariscordia got each and every single one of them their very own shadow Pokemon. An army of well over 4,000 team members armed with shadow Pokemon, Ariscordia and her shadow minions, which were needless to say stronger than the ones handed to the team members, were the odds this intruder had to face. As they spread throughout the city, all members unleashed their shadow Pokemon, and as soon as they were out they were ordered to search for anything out of place. Meanwhile, Pikachu had been hiding in an alley for a signal it was waiting for, but a familiar sound distracted it. Pikachu turned around and saw Skitty being pushed towards a wall by a shadow Scyther and a shadow Espeon. Pikachu raced over as the Scyther raised its massive scythe to slash Skitty. Right before Skitty could fall victim to the deadly scythe, Pikachu tensed its muscles and released an intense and powerful thunder attack. The T-Hunter hit the shadow Scyther dead on and it fell on its knees, but the Espeon used Psybeam on Pikachu. Pikachu was a strong Pokemon, but these shadow Pokemon were much stronger. Skitty saw Pikachu need help, so it unleashed its strongest blizzard attack, which resulted in 2 frozen sculptures. Skitty ran to Pikachu and both little Pokemon sat to chat. "Nah, nah, 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 Pika, Pi, Pika, Pikachu." Skitty had just explained how May and the others were being kept locked inside cages on the last floor of the tall building. Pikachu decided to help, so it told Skitty to lead the way so they could help May and the others. As the 2 little Pokemon went on, all team members were searching the city for the intruder Ariscordia so coveted. Throughout the city there were 48 team members and each of them were equipped with 2 shadow Pokemon. So the intruder had to face a total of 96 shadow Pokemon. A great number of people were walking down the main street and their shadow Pokemon had been released. The shadows suddenly got a whiff of a very hostile scent which set them on a wild mood. As the shadows looked around, everyone heard a thunderous roar. Both Pokemon and humans looked about to place the sound with something, but they saw nothing. Suddenly the sky grew darker, and a dark shade covered the sun. As everyone was busy watching the sun, a strange and thick fog began to roll from out of the nowhere. A shadow NT growled, letting the members know there was something in the fog. A shadowy figure slowly walked to the edge of the fog but maintained hidden within the fog. As it walked right to the edge, they noticed the shadow take shape like a human. The shadow let out a shrieking snarl, letting them know it was not human at all. All members were struck with the realization they were face to face with the intruder, but before they could act they were distracted by a black transparent aura that swiftly swam in the fog. The aura quickly raised high into the sky and took the shape of a great black and transparent raven. It stretched in size and expanded its massive wings, and as it opened its beak a shadowy beam erupted from within and struck all humans and Pokemon. People were brought down heavily and the shadows turned into a light dust which was swept away by the wind. As quick as it appeared, the fog vanished and the sun returned to normal but was still covered by thick rain clouds. A carpet of unconscious people littered the main street, but there was no sign of the intruder anywhere. Back at the bank, Ariscordia was hit with a feeling of hostility. Not only was Petrov missing, but something in the back of her mind told her to look out the window. She slowly walked towards the window facing the north side, which was where the main street laid. Ariscordia looked down and saw a huge group of people laying on the street unconscious and some black dust as well. She knew the dust was from her shadow minions and only a legendary Pokemon had enough power to take on her shadow minions, but to have taken all those out so quickly and silently would have been done by something stronger than any legendary. She had to face the reality that her doubts, fears and suspicions were all indeed true. After what seemed forever, Pikachu and Skitty finally reached the top floor and saw some light at the end of the air vent. Skitty pushed open the vent and out popped Skitty and Pikachu. "Pika, nah." Those were the greetings Pikachu and Skitty yelled out as they saw their human friends in the cages. As soon as they laid eyes on the 2 little Pokemon, their faces lit up with hope and joy. "Pikachu, you're all right. I can't believe it," May said as she opened her arms to welcome in Skitty, who ran to her and hugged her. Officer Jenny was indeed delighted, but their celebration had to be cut short since they couldn't waste time on petty celebrations that might be in vain. Okay, does anyone have any fire and water type Pokemon? At the mention of those two types in particular, they all knew what she was meaning to do. May had a Torchic, Brock had a Mudkip, Dante had a Houndour and a Houndoom, and CJ had a Vaporeon and a Seadra. 3 fire types and 3 water types, and with Dante's Flaffy and Meowth using their strongest body slam, they would be free in no time. Pikachu had been shown where their backpacks had been put, so they ran over, and while Pikachu searched for May's Torchic and Brock's Mudkip, Skitty released Symphony so she could look for CJ's Vaporeon and Seadra and Dante's Houndour and Houndoom. Symphony ripped through the backpacks and pushed the button on the Pokeballs, and Houndour, Vaporeon and Seadra. Dante and May were up first, so they gave their Pokemon the orders. Alright, listen up. Inferno, Hellfire, I want both you to hit these bars with the strongest and hottest flamethrower you guys have. I mean boiling hot. L with you toughest Ember attack. Got it. Mudkip as soon as they stop their flamethrowers, and Mbers I want you to use Water Gun on the same spot they hit the bars. Arcana, Blatangle, when the Mudkip hits the bars with Water Gun I want you to do the same. Now that their orders were clear, Inferno the Houndoom, Hellfire the Houndour and May's Torchic stepped forward and released 2 massive flamethrowers and a powerful Ember on the bars. After a few minutes they stopped, and CJ's Pokemon stepped forward and played their part, as well as Brock's Mudkip. Arcana the Vaporeon, Blatangle the Seadra and Mudkip hit the boiling bars with a showering Water Gun attack. As soon as the water hit bars, smoke bounced right off the bars and a wave of heat infested the room. After the water stopped, another wave of fire hit the bars, and after 3 minutes the fire stopped and another shower fell on the bars. Right before the water would stop, Dante asked Symphony to release 2 more of his Pokemon. Symphony released 2 more Pokemon, and when they materialized there stood a Flaffy and a Meowth, and Dante gave his orders. Vitki, Lilith, I want you to hit the bars as soon as the water stops with your strongest double-edge attacks. Alright. Both Pokemon acknowledged their trainer's order. So Vitki the Flaffy and Lilith the Meowth paid close attention to the bars. As soon as the water stopped, Vitki landed the first blow, but it did not manage to break the bars. Lilith gave it a try, but the bars would not budge either, so both Pokemon looked at each other and decided to hit the bars at the same time. Vitki and Lilith ran towards the bars and hit them at the same time with their wrongest double-edge attack, and that managed to break the weakened bars and set their trainers free. Officer Jenny thought using the attack combo would take up too much time, so she looked around for the keys to the other cage. As she moved around several boxes, she heard a jingle-like sound indicating that she found what she was looking for. She dove her hand inside a box and dug out a set of keys which were kept together by a rusty old ring that looked like it had seen better days. In the ring there were 5 keys. She tried all of them, but it was the last one that was the key to open the cage. Once freed, they all made their way out of the room to figure out how to get out of the building in one piece. Meanwhile, as the sun set itself to sleep behind the mountains, the sky grew even darker and wicked. Ariscordia shrugged at the thought of the night's darkness. After all, the light was her domain and the darkness was Ash's domain. For a while now she had been on the lookout for someone in particular. She had been searching in alleys, hidden corners and on the highest buildings. One place she did not search was underground, under the streets of Alexandria City. The sewers were perfect for going anywhere and moving about without being noticed, and her failing to check that out would turn out to be a fatal mistake. As Ariscordia walked the streets in search for the intruder, she picked up a very familiar scent, but this time the sensation of extreme anger came along with it. As she took several steps she became a bit dizzy. She looked up at the street lights and the light became fuzzy and blurred. She kept walking forward and noticed no other humans in the area. Ariscordia looked around frantically and saw that there were no members anywhere, no Team Rockets, Team Aqua or Team Magma. From the minute it took her to get out of the bank, all members she had gathered had disappeared into thin air. She kept walking down the street, and as she wondered and questioned, a thick eerie fog rolled in and covered the entire city in a matter of seconds. She stopped and looked about. Her heart was racing and her breath had become heavy and somewhat slow. As her eyes scanned the area she heard a low chuckle. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere, confusing her further than what she already was. Suddenly Ariscordia came to the realization that an attack had been placed on her. Hysteria was a powerful attack which made the victim see and hear things that were not really there. She closed her eyes and concentrated, and once she was sure she had overpowered the effect of the hysteria attack. Once her eyes opened, the team members all stood around her looking at her in a funny way, as if questioning her sanity for the display she had shown once she walked out the front door. Riscordia's rage grew and her patience shortened. She knew hysteria was not an attack any Pokémon knew, so she was indeed convinced of Ash's survival, so she walked up to the middle of the crowd and yelled out to him, "Where are you? Show yourself, you coward." At that instant an eerie and disturbing howl wrapped the night's atmosphere and sent a chill through its audience's spine. The howl had been heard from behind the huge group of people and shadow Pokémon down on the street, so each and every single person and shadow turned to face a huge abandoned building, and right in front of the building was a shadowy figure staring back. That figure was none other than Ash Ketchum himself. As he stared back, thunder struck high above in the heavens and rain began to pour down on them. Ash remained quiet and held a very threatening and serious look on his face. He was still wearing the clothes Dante lent him for the undercover trick back at the museum. As the rain poured down on him, his hair became so wet some flicks of his hair fell on his face, partially hiding his eyes, which were staring coldly right into Ariscordia's eyes. Ariscordia took a few steps forward and mocked his silent but threatening approach by smiling as she walked toward him. She stopped about 10 feet away from him and placed her hands on her hips as she stood straight up. She smiled, but Ash was still very silent and never removed his eyes from hers. Ariscordia was then struck with curiosity as to how he managed to survive the blast and what became of Old Man Petrov. Before she could open her mouth to ask or say anything, Ash said in a low and cold voice, "How did I survive the blast? Simple. There was a manhole in the basement leading down to the sewers. So before the time ran out, I slipped down and ran off." Whatever happened to Old Man Petrov? Instead of answering quickly like he did before, he just looked at her, and a very wicked and troublesome smirk invaded his face, indicating that things did not go at all too well for Petrov. Ariscordia thought that through but even as dark as he had become, Ash would never be capable of a thing such as murder, so she waited to see his answer. Ash simply put his hands behind his back and said, "Let's just say hysteria is an attack humans don't react well to." Ariscordia was not at all too bothered. After all, Petrov only proved useful for certain things, and ever since she took over Alexandria City, he had become useless. However, Ash on the other hand was proving to be more of a plague now, a plague she had to get rid of permanently if she wanted to succeed. Cordia simply raised her right arm and snapped her fingers, and all remaining team members released their shadow Pokémon. Dozens of shadows walked slowly and menacingly towards Ash, but all he did was remain calm. Ash slowly closed his eyes and kept his face looking forward, and then lowered his head and remained absolutely quiet. Ariscordia tilted her head a little to the right and raised an eyebrow in a curious manner, as if asking why he was doing that instead of attacking like she thought he would be by now. After a minute or so, Ariscordia's patience was wearing thin, so she snapped her fingers once more, and all the shadow Pokémon raced towards Ash. He simply remained calm and quiet as the shadows raced towards him. From the bank, Officer Jenny and the others watched as Ash just stood there, without reacting or even saying a word, which worried them but at the same time made them smile, for they knew he had a plan up his sleeve. Before the shadow Pokémon could reach Ash, a low humming sound was heard in the air, and suddenly Ash slowly levitated and stood there. He was still leaning his face down and his eyes were still closed. All the shadows froze, and just like Ariscordia watched to see what he would do next. Ash remained perfectly still for a few minutes, and suddenly the ground from underneath them all began to violently shake. The shaking began to get stronger and far more violent. Team members were so shaken up that some hung onto light posts while the majority fell on their backs from the earth's movements. Ariscordia levitated as well, but only inches from the ground, and remained calm to see what her rival was up to. As the ground shook, the buildings all around were collapsing. Most of the buildings in Alexandria City were mostly composed of glass, so the shaking had its effect on the glass, causing tons of glass to cover the streets in a crystal carpet. Ariscordia kept watching Ash and saw the street underneath him ripping A thin crippled line formed underneath Ash and it expanded in width. Even with all the people and shadows running about, Ariscordia couldn't help but keep an eye on Ash. Just as sudden as it started, the earthquake ended and the wind died down. Everything was very quiet. Nothing was heard, especially from Ash. As Ash levitated in midair, he appeared almost terrifying. He looked like a ghost sent back from the underworld to unleash its anger upon all those who caused it pain during its time on Earth. Finally, Ash lifted his face at a slow pace and quickly opened his eyes, revealing bright yellow eyes that pierced even the most daring and defying stare. Everyone in the area stopped running and screaming and looked at Ash. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen, Pikachu, Brock and May looked at Ash both with fear and curiosity. The dark image that fell on him was indeed terrifying. It was like some sort of unholy creature about to unleash powers of darkness no mortal could survive. It was also ironic, for that terrifying, unholy creature was what would save not only Alexandria City and Northbridge Town from total annihilation, but also the entire world. Everyone stood silently and anxiously, but then seconds later there was a deep rumble coming from the gash under Ash, who was still levitating in midair. Ariscordia's patience was right at the limit, so she stepped forward and taunted him just to irritate him, a little something she enjoyed doing. She looked at him from top to bottom and scoffed, but then lifted her eyebrow in interest, but then said, "Nice outfit, Azrael." Her attempt to annoy him fell on deaf ears. He continued to stare coldly at her, and she was the one getting annoyed. Before Ariscordia could send her shadows after him, the rumbling intensified, and right out of the gap a great wall of fire rose from the ground. The wall stood about 30 feet high. The light emitting from the fire wall was so great it almost made it seem like dawn. All the people out on the street gasped in fear and shock. As the members ran about the shadows, prepared for anything, but it proved useless. Ash lifted his left arm and the wall of fire shot forward and straight at the crowd before him. All shadows were incinerated into a loose black dust. As for the humans, some made it inside the buildings on that street, but for those who were not as lucky, they were lying on the street with a few small burns, but nothing overly serious. Ariscordia, on the other hand, had teleported to avoid the wall. Ash's eyes returned to their soft brown color, but as they did, he scanned the area for any sign of Ariscordia. He knew hitting her with just one blow was too much to hope for, so he readied himself for just about anything to come his way. As he searched about, a wave of razor-sharp leaves swiftly cut through the air and were going straight for Ash. He looked at the leaves and lifted his left arm, and as they flew closer they began to slow down until they made a complete stop. As the razor-sharp leaves stood there, they started to fall to the ground one by one. Once the last leaf hit the ground, he looked up and said as he laughed, "Bravo! Bravo indeed. Razor leaf attack. Why not try bubble attack or something like that? Don't jerk me around, Boris." As Ash took a step forward, he then felt Ariscordia's presence right behind him. He slowly turned around and saw his rival standing there looking at him. Ash noticed no anger, fear or any emotions at that. He wondered why, for he would think anger would be the only feeling she would be displaying at the moment. Both of them stared at each other for the longest time. Back up on the bank, they had been watching everything from the very beginning and were anxious to see what other attacks and ideas Ash had hidden away. After several minutes, Ariscordia finally spoke up and said in a cold tone, "So far you have been the biggest pain in the butt I have ever had the misfortune to meet." Ash couldn't help but smile, but this did not bother Ariscordia, for she was confident that she'd bring Ash down once and for all, and continued, "Let's see how long you last out here. Long enough to send you back where you came from." Both Ash and Ariscordia turned around and gave each other their backs and slowly marched away. All who were watching found this rather odd, but they kept watching nonetheless to see what they were up to. After a gap of about 23 feet stood before the two rivals, both of them began to actually glow. After the glowing light subdued, they could see they had taken the shape of other Pokémon. Where Ariscordia stood now stood a Dragonite, but this Dragonite had different colors. Instead of a light orange color, it was now white. The belly, antennas and skin on the wings were a soft, pale gray. Where Ash stood now stood a Charizard. This Charizard was also different. It was completely black except for the belly, the skin in its wings and the fire on the tip of its tail, which were also a soft, pale gray. Both dragons snarled at each other as their eyes burned with their prospected colors. At the same time both of them took off high into the sky and began to blast powerful attacks at one another. Ariscordia opened her mouth and unleashed a massive dragon rage attack, so Ash did the same thing and unleashed a massive dragon rage attack. Both of them were hit at the same time and with equal amount of force. Ariscordia began to glow once more, so Ash did the same at the same time. It was as if whatever one was going to do the other knew. As soon as they stopped glowing there were now two Mews. One was black, the other white, their eyes however remained the same. Both of them flew off in opposite directions. After they were so apart that they looked like specks in the night sky, Ash extended his left arm and his small paw began to glow purple. Ariscordia did the same thing and wound up with her right arm extended and her little paw glowing purple. At the end of their paws was a purple sphere which seemed to grow with each passing minute. Both took off at the same time and headed towards each other at high speeds. When they were close to each other both lifted their arms, and as soon as they came face to face both of their paws met, and as their palms touched each other's the spheres blew up and caused a massive nuclear-like explosion in the sky. The impact of both spheres caused an explosion due to the fact that both attacks had been sent out with equal force and strength, and it also caused for both of them to fall back. Ariscordia hit a satellite atop of one of the buildings while Ash hit his back on a building wall. As soon as they picked themselves up they changed shape once more, and this time both changed into flygons. Both shrieked and flew at high speeds towards each other, and just seconds before there would be a collision both of them swiftly flew up into the night sky. With only a few mere inches separating their bodies both kept their heads up looking into the sky, but at the same time storing energy to deploy a seriously strong and destructive hyper beam attack. Miles into the dark sky both of them swirled around each other and grabbed their claws as if holding one another to hit the attack right at the target. At the same time they opened their MO another with a devastating hyper beam attack, one that proved useless, for as soon as the beam cleared away they saw each other still flying high. Ash snarled and flew straight down towards the ground, and as soon as he landed he changed shape once more, but this time he turned into a minion. He ran to the end of the street and stood still as he watched Ariscordia, who was still high in the sky. Ariscordia spotted Ash and swiftly swooped down to the street, and as soon as she was in range Ash shrieked as he released extremely powerful thunder attacks right at Ariscordia. Ariscordia evaded each thunder as she moved sideways and back and forth. Wherever the thunder landed it left massive smoking holes on the street. The bystanders stared deeply into the holes, realizing just how dangerous both of them were. Ash however had no thoughts in his mind. The only thing running through his mind was one objective only: hit Ariscordia. He stopped sending thunder attacks from the sky and noticed Ariscordia drawing closer, so he closed his eyes and stood still. Ariscordia had been blinded by rage, so she paid little attention to what her rival was up to, which would prove to be a bad mistake. As soon as Ariscordia was in range Ash unleashed an even more powerful thunder attack. The thunder raced down on Earth from the clouds above and hit her right on her back, violently slamming her to the ground. The thunder kept racing down on her, but then she grew wise and changed into a massive white and pale gray onyx. The thunder no longer had an effect on her, so she raised her massive tail high up and dropped it mercilessly on Ash. Officer Jenny and the others gasped in fear as they had just witnessed a massive onyx drop its heavy tail on a small and meek minion. Ariscordia's witty move did not last long. For minutes later a massive black and pale gray Groudon rose from under the tail, and as it did it tightly gripped the onyx's tail in its mouth and tossed the onyx with all its strength. Ariscordia landed right on a building, which after the impact began to tumble down as most of the foundation had been crippled by loose onyx. Ash then changed into a small Cyndaquil and Ariscordia changed into a Trico. Both raced towards each other, and as soon as they were close Ariscordia unleashed a wave of high-speed bullet seeds. Ash sort of panicked but managed to dodge most of them, but the ones that did hit him hurt enough to make him cry out. Cinda, Canyon, Cyndaquil. Trico, Co. Ash was beginning to get furious, and he knew if he let his rage blind him Ariscordia could use that as an edge, so before she could fire another bullet seed attack he unleashed a flamethrower, which roasted her, but it barely did any damage. That situation was beginning to really get to both of them, since every attack they launched at each other was either evaded or barely did any damage. Both stood in front of each other and gasped for air as they tiredly kept an eye on each other. Both of them then began to glow, and as soon as they stopped glowing they had changed back into human form. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen, Brock, May and Pikachu looked restlessly waiting to see what they would do next. They could tell both were tired and worn out, but the look on their faces indicated that the fight was far from over. Not only did they look mad, but the way they were breathing indicated that the attacks, although having little effect, were doing some damage, even if it was very little. The awkward silence between the two rivals was nerve-wracking to those in the area as they watched carefully in case one would move. Brock, May and especially Pikachu were not only concerned but afraid. They had never seen that look on Ash's face before. It was indeed terrifying and something they were hoping never to lay eyes on again after Ash traps Ariscordia into the sphere and they would continue on with the rest of their journey. Suddenly they both changed shape once more, and now Ash had turned into a black Scyther with bright yellow eyes and Ariscordia changed into a white Scyther with blood-red eyes. Both Scythers jumped towards each other and swung their scythes at one another. The impact from the scythes was very heavy. When both scythes touched they let out a clanking sound like that of a Trojan sword as it clashed with the sword of a Greek in war. It seemed every time they changed shape the fight would get more violent and far more dangerous for both of them. Ariscordia swung her scythe a little too close to Ash's right leg, but she missed by just a few inches. This frightened Pikachu, so the little mouse quickly ran to the streets, but Symphony ran after it and Skitty saw the two little Pokémon running out, so it tugged on May's leg and yelled out, "Nah, nah." May turned to face her little Pokémon and kneeled down to see what was wrong. "What is it, Skitty?" Skitty then pointed at the door and saw it open, and Dee then noticed Pikachu and Symphony were missing. Meanwhile, back out in the street, Ariscordia had kicked Ash and had fallen to the ground after a powerful mega kick had landed on his left side. Ash was sort of dazed, but he could see as Ariscordia raised her scythe and let it go to hit Ash, but he quickly rolled to the side and saw the scythe land hard on the street, leaving a deep impression on the pavement. Ash got back up and jumped high into the sky, and as soon as he felt he had enough altitude he used agility to reach his target quicker, and before Ariscordia could react Ash had pounced on her and tried to slash her, but she had moved her scythe in front of her, blocking Ash from slashing her. Ash tried to push forward, but Ariscordia put up a fight despite the fact that Ash had the upper hand and was psychically stronger than her. As they wrestled about, Ash was suddenly distracted as Pikachu stood on the sidewalk and called out to its trainer, "Pika Pie." Ash looked and lowered his defense. Say so Ariscordia raised her legs and put them right under Ash and flipped him. In midair Ash managed to twist about and landed on his legs, but as soon as he gathered himself he saw Ariscordia looking at him, and he heard as she said telepathically, "Seems I can't hurt you much this way, so I'll attack where it hurts the most." Ash suddenly realized what she meant by that, but before he could stop her, she had teleported right next to Pikachu and raised her right side, but before slicing the small mouse to pieces she noticed something around the little yellow mouse's neck. Ariscordia's eyes widened as she laid eyes on the black sphere. Hours before their encounter Ash had entrusted his best friend with looking after the black sphere he stole from Petrov. She then realized that Ash must have had the white sphere with him. Her plans weren't completely ruined after all. Instead of attacking Pikachu she swung the scythe close to Pikachu and broke the chain around the little Pikachu's neck and snatched the sphere, but before she could celebrate Ash had teleported behind her, and as soon as he grabbed her he teleported them to the top of the bank. Once at the top of the bank both snarled at each other and looked at one another viciously. Now that Ariscordia had her sphere and Ash had his, both would be very difficult to bring down. After a brief moment of threatening each other both of them jumped at themselves at the same time. Ariscordia swung her left scythe but Ash blocked it with his right scythe, but Ariscordia used her free scythe and slashed Ash on the left side of his face. That angered him, so he violently and quickly swung his left scythe and slashed Ariscordia on her right arm. Both Scythers backed up and kept a space of about 15 feet from each other. Both remained calm and, at the same time, changed back into human form. Ariscordia had a bloody thin line on her arm while Ash had a bloody thin line across the left side of his face. It wasn't a serious injury, but they were both still quite angry from it. Ariscordia wiped the angry look from her face and a grin invaded her face as she put her hand on her hip. Ash calmed down a tad and waited to see what she would do. Are you to fight? I'll give you that. But you have also been the biggest, most bothersome pain in the ass I have ever had to put up with. At that second Ash chuckled and a wicked grin slowly carved on his face. A feeling overcame Ariscordia. A feeling that the boy standing before her was up to something. She kept looking at him cautiously and wanted to ask him something, but she preferred not to say she would get involved in the conversation and would cause her to lower her defenses. Ash kept staring into her eyes seriously, and the wicked smile grew more and more, not in length but in its wicked nature. In his silence he had been conjuring up a devastating attack, an attack more powerful than Aeroblast or Sky Attack put together. Ariscordia kept looking at him now, rather curious instead of cautiously. She raised an eyebrow, questioning his motives as to why the smirk on his face. Deep down she knew he was up to something, but his cocky nature was getting to her. Suddenly a powerful burst of cold wind hit her like a ton of bricks. The impact sent her to the ground, and as she hit the ground the wind died down, and in a dazed notion she looked up and saw Ash still grinning and looking at her. Ariscordia realized that Ash had used microburst, but not at a destructive level. He was merely toying with her. You little brat. Wait till I get my hands on you. Ariscordia extended her claws, which strangely were not that long and were a soft pale gray, unlike Ash's, which he had also extended as he kept his hands hidden behind his back. As Ariscordia walked closer she lifted her right arm up. Nd swung it at Ash's face, but Ash grabbed her hand before she could slash him once more. She looked at him and thought to herself, he's going to be tougher than I thought. Ariscordia dragged her hand away and took several steps back. After she had a good distance between him and herself she began to glow as they did when they were about to change shape, so Ash readied himself for anything. A pure white aura wrapped Ariscordia from top to bottom, and suddenly the light became so bright it actually stung Ash's eyes, but he tried his best to keep an eye on her. Ariscordia then began to levitate and continue to glow. A glow which was so potent it grabbed the attention of all bystanders down on the streets. Suddenly two strange shapes extended from her back and the glowing aura ceased. High in the night sky was a beautiful figure. Ariscordia had changed into her real shape. She had long, soft silver hair, gorgeous and huge white wings that looked as fluffy as an Articuno's icy feathers. The wings also had several silver feathers tucked in between the army of beautiful white feathers. Ariscordia also had on a magnificent white dress made of soft silk. The dress was long and in a tube style. But looked decent, unlike all the other outfits she had worn during her conflict with Ash. Her skin pale as the moon's face but as gentle as a newborn's sweet smile. Unlike before, she was now barefoot. No 5-inch heels or leather boots to decorate her seductive styles. Ariscordia was indeed the very image of all things pure and beautiful. Still, that image held no remorse for Ash, for he knew the truth about the apparition before him. Although she looked like the most beautiful creature on the face of the planet on the outside, inside she couldn't have been more frightening and horrendous. Shish exhaled in a frustrated fashion as he looked upon the beauty before him, thinking of her image and then thinking how he would turn. The thought of turning into that which gives nightmares, that YCH stands for everything he ever stood against, that which the greatest force of darkness had crafted with its filthy, unholy claws. For a brief moment a touch of sadness overwhelmed him. Nothing that was happening was fair. Especially for him, he was not used to having such a dark nature, nor had he ever thought he would be that which every morally correct person would turn down. He looked down on himself and saw how he was dressed. Strangely enough, he hadn't noticed he was still dressed that way. Ash looked at his hands and then his arms, which were covered by the black overcoat he had borrowed from Dante. His wardrobe consisted of a pair of black, leather rock boots, black, baggy pants, a plain black, long-sleeved shirt and a black overcoat that reached his ankles. He sighed sadly, and as he slowly closed his eyes a tear fell out and caressed his cheek. For that split second he said to himself he was defeated. He had given up, and Ariscordia had not even started to fight him. Ash had let himself defeat him. As he dug himself into that hole he fell to his knees and quietly sobbed. An alien feeling overcame him, but he cared not. He only wanted this to be over and to go back to the way things were. During that entire time Ariscordia had been telepathically listening to him. She had tapped into his thoughts and read every word and felt every devastating feeling, and was quite surprised at him. She slowly and swiftly lowered down to the rooftop and walked over to him. Ash saw her walking towards him and felt nothing. He only wanted this all to end, no matter who would suffer the consequences of his actions. When Ariscordia stopped, he kept his eyes on the ground, looking at the small dots of tears on the floor, and said in a low and sad tone, "Just do it. Just do it and get it over with, please." Ariscordia smiled sweetly and sat on her knees right in front of Ash. She slowly put her hand under his chin and lifted his face until she saw his eyes full of despair, sadness and tears. "You're strong. Most people who touch the sphere break down the minute they learn what it is that they have become. It's like you said," as Marco was explaining, "it's just another sickening moral lesson." This of course was said telepathically. No Pokemon could ever talk like a human could, no matter how intelligent or powerful. This was indeed a side to Ariscordia Ash had never seen or even thought existed in her. He thought that in his fragile state she would take advantage of it and kill him the second he had dropped to his knees, not to mention after he had asked her to do it. He reacted to what she had said and replied, "A moral lesson. Look what I've become. How is this a moral lesson?" he said as a few more tears slowly marched down his cheek and he looked at himself. What you look like does not define who you are. What defines a person are the actions they do and choices they make in life. You and I and your friends and everyone else down there are merely pawns in this little game called life. The game's outcome depends on the moves you make. You've been given a weapon for you to use, a weapon created by darkness but to be used by the light. The entire lesson that both civilizations had to learn was that looks can be and are deceiving. Thanade stood for all the good in the world, yet he was cast out as a demon, but I who stood for all the wrong reasons were celebrated. Only because I did not look like a nightmare. You may not understand now, but in time you will, love." Ariscordia leaned into his ear and said, "You need not wish for death so soon. Your time will come, but nowhere near this time and age." Ash was still not only confused but still had no will to fight, and Ariscordia saw this and her answer was simple, sweet and just right. She lifted her right arm and slowly put her index finger right where his heart was located and said in the softest and sweetest voice he had ever heard, "In the middle of darkness there's a light." With that being said, Ash did not fully understand, but that last statement made a lot of things clear for him now. He smiled and Ariscordia returned the smile, but then the strange scenario of the light and the darkness exchanging pleasantries would soon end, for both had a score to settle. Ariscordia flapped her graceful wings and flew into the night sky. Once high enough, she extended her right arm and lifted her index finger, and at the tip of her finger a small white sphere began to materialize, and it grew slowly. Ash stared at the sphere and then realized what attack it was. The A-light's shadow, but it could do some heavy damage if he took a direct hit. He turned around and ran away from Ariscordia, but as she unleashed the attack it hit right behind him, pushing him over the building's edge. The front side of the bank had a sliding design to it that allowed Ash to only slide down the building. Of course, as Ash slid out of control he tried to hang on to something, but there was nothing he could get a good grip of. So he extended his claws on both hands and sank them into the glass. The claws made a horrible screeching sound that bothered him, but he knew if he let the sound get to him he would slide faster and surely go over the edge. As he reached the edge he got a good grip of the edge and held on as long as he could. Meanwhile down below everyone had been watching, and Officer Jenny and the others became alarmed when they saw someone hanging on to the edge of the building. "Oh, my goodness. Ash. Pika Pie." Ash groaned as he slipped a little but tried to hang on as much as possible. Ariscordia flew down to where he was and said, as she once again became that vile and unpleasant girl who had made Ash's life miserable for the past few days, "Well, how's the view from there, Ashy boy?" "Oh, you idiot. TCH. My, what a short temper we have. So how are you doing?" "Falling, jackass. I'm falling." Ariscordia began to laugh, and as she did she pointed her right index finger at Ash. She was going to hit him with the same attack, but before she could he let go of the edge and fell down 96 floors. When he hit the ground he did so with his feet, and as soon as his feet touched the ground he walked forward and seriously. All bystanders were both shocked and amazed as to how he landed on his 2 feet and broke nothing. Ariscordia of course was not happy at all. She flew down and landed close to Ash, but he kept walking down the road, and after he felt he had a good distance he stopped dead in his tracks. Ash began to glow with a black aura, and a black mist appeared and wrapped itself all around him. The mist became so dense no one could see anything at all, but Ariscordia knew what was happening, so she sat back and waited. Slowly the mist cleared away and all around gasped in horror, for Ash had also changed into his now true form. Before them stood a nightmare. The creature was a gargoyle with black skin, 2 huge wings that looked like a devil's with the skin on the inside silver like Ariscordia's hair and feathers. The gargoyle had frightening yellow eyes, needle-sharp fangs that looked like they could tear flesh in a matter of seconds. There were 3 massive horns on its head, and several long and thin spikes running down its back and a long smooth tail. The creature was truly menacing and scary. Just looking at him brought unease to all who laid their eyes on him: Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen. Brock, May and Pikachu were all frightened by Ash. Ash however cared not. He knew what and who he really was and who Ariscordia was, so the form bestowed upon him did not trouble him one bit. And it in fact fed his ambition to defeat Ariscordia. Ariscordia on the other hand was having trouble. The dark image before her scared her to no end, but she tried her best not to show it, although it was futile since Ash could smell the fear emitting from her. Now that both were even, they were about to give all they could and stop at nothing to win this battle that would determine if the end was near or not. Ariscordia was a tad insecure about what her actions should be, since over the years she lost all her battles one after another. Ariscordia lifted both arms at shoulder length and closed her eyes as she began to concentrate deeply. Ash knew she was up to no good, so he kept both eyes open in case she would pull a dirty trick. A soft rumble was felt on the ground as Ariscordia summoned her shadow minions once more. Right behind her from the ground a dozen shadows emerged from the ground and stood still as they waited for her orders. This time all her shadows were legendaries: Mewtwo, Mew, Lugia, Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Ho-Oh, NT, Suicune, Celebi, Latios, Latias, Groudon, Jirachi and Rayquaza stood behind her and snarled as they laid eyes on their target. A feeling that Ariscordia had tapped into his mind crossed by his thoughts, since all shadows standing there represented all legendaries that he had encountered. The shadows divided and separated as they made a team of 3 in order to take Ash down. Of course that didn't stop Ariscordia from having a bit of fun of her own. She looked at her shadow minions and said, "Now my pets, 1 pack of 3 shall attack, and then the other and then the other. Of course, you will succeed in bringing him down, so I don't see the need for replacing each other. Now, get him." The Mewtwo, Mew and Lugia launched after him as the first to strike. All 3 raced towards him, but he lay perfectly still as he concentrated and focused on an attack. High above Ash the clouds began to circle about slowl. Why but surely, and as they did they were making a portal to the sky. This portal of course was an attack, one Ariscordia knew of well, as the clouds made a circle from the middle. A thin ray of pure light dropped down on him, and as soon as it touched him it filtered through him, and as he opened his snout widely a wide burst of pure white energy rushed straight to the shadows. As soon as it hit the shadows they burst into dust. Ariscordia became infuriated, so she sent all remaining shadows after him. This of course was no real problem for Ash, since he knew he could easily defeat them and he would get a kick out of watching more of Ariscordia's cheats go down in flames. First to approach was the Groudon, which was a fire ground type, so any water attack would bring the massive shadow down. Ash hot of an attack, but for it he would need to gather as much as energy as possible. He began to concentrate on the attack and focused on the target as it approached. When he felt the Groudon was too close, he unleashed an abnormally strong water pulse attack on the Groudon. The wave of water hit the giant beast like a bulldozer would hit a brick wall at top speeds. As soon as the dust cleared, the Suicune hit Ash with a massive skull bash. Ash fell back, but he was not brought down. Right next to the Suicune was the Moltres, which was a flying fire type, and Suicune was water, so any electric attack would come in handy. Suicune and Moltres both turned around and headed right for Ash with another skull bash and Moltres with a double edge. Ash got up and charged some electricity through his entire body as he ran straight for the 2 shadows. As soon as all 3 came into contact there was a massive electrical explosion that caused the shadows to turn into dust. As soon as the deuce settled, Rayquaza and Entei ran towards him from different directions. All Ash thought of was to sit perfectly still and wait. As the shadows drew closer Ash spread his demonic-like wings and went shadows were only inches away. He jumped high into the sky and flew off, causing Rayquaza and Entei to crash into one another in a destructive collision. High above, a mist ball passed right by Ash. He looked at where it came from and saw Latios and Latias racing towards him. He snarled from the frustration that these shadows were not about to give up the chase, but nonetheless he flapped his wings and flew even higher into the sky. Latios and Latias gave chase just as he wanted them to do so. Ash had flown so high up he popped up from under the clouds and swirled around about 2 times as he placed. Nose first back down while Latios and Latias still gave chase. Ash flapped his wings intensely as he dove faster and faster towards the cold, hard concrete down below. Those looking at the battle were wondering why Ash was doing that, but they were about to find out. As soon as Ash was very, very close to the ground, he pulled up and flew a few mere inches from the pavement. Of course, Latios wasn't as fortunate. It was too slow to pull up, so it hit the ground at top speeds of Mach 2, and the result was a rather nasty burwas. Quicker though, she followed Ash's every move. Ash picked up the pace and flew faster, and so did Latias. Up ahead, Ash saw another skyscraper and came up with another idea. For 4 years Ash had led his Pokémon into gym battles and leagues, and from everything he saw and learned he fed off as he tried to beat this new challenge presented. Ash tried to pull off the same trick with Latias. As soon as he was inches from the building wall, he pulled up quickly and flew up alongside of the building, but Latias did not fall for it. As Ash climbed the side of the building wall, Latias began to blast mist balls at him, but he managed to evade each and every single one of them. Almost at the top of the building, Ash picked up more speed, and as soon as he passed the last floor he swooped backwards, sort of forming a huge C, and around the curve he twisted around and Latias, who was then smashed through the building's glass and brought into the building. Once inside, Ash managed to shove Latias through to the other side, and as they smashed through the other side of the building, Ash grabbed one of Latias' paws and swung her around and brutally tossed her towards another building wall, but as soon as Latias hit the wall she burst into dust from the impact. Down on the ground, Ariscordia watched as her rival viciously and brutally finished off her minions with combinations of both wit and brute strength perfectly aligned to create catastrophic results. Those L2 moves were something almost barbaric and intense, proving that Ash was not going to go down as easily as her previous rivals, although he had already proven it long ago. High above in the sky, Ash looked down on Ariscordia and let out a rather threatening and intense roar. After doing so he swooped down and tried to tackle Ariscordia, but inches from her, Ho-Oh had hit Ash on his side with a devastating double-edge attack that sent him flying to a nearby telephone booth, which he smashed into pieces. Brock, May and Pikachu were startled by the intensity of the hit, which looked quite painful from where they were standing. From the Ruble, Ash strained to his feet and saw Ariscordia with the remaining shadows beside her. She swiftly waved her hand and they vanished into thin air and took 2 steps forward. Ash snarled as she approached him. She took it as a threat, so before he could go anywhere she teleported right next to him. Ash tried to hold it together, but the hit had taken its toll. He changed shape back into human form and tried to catch his breath as he stared at Ariscordia viciously and with fury. Ariscordia lifted her right arm and a piece of fallen metal levitated in midair. That same piece of metal quickly launched right at Ash's throat and tightened as Ariscordia controlled it by closing her fist. Pikachu saw how Ariscordia was strangling his best friend, so it decided to take the situation into its own paws. Pikachu ran to Ariscordia and hit her with its best Thunderbolt as it shrieked out, "Pikachu!" But being what she was, the Thunderbolt barely even affected her. She did, however, grow weary from Pikachu's attempt to try and stop her. Ariscordia pointed her right arm at Pikachu and fired a rather meek thunder attack. Of course, to Pikachu the attack was anything but meek, as it was enough to bring the little mouse down. Ash had seen that, so he struggled to get back on his feet, but the more he struggled the tighter the piece of metal became. Ash was too stubborn to stop struggling, so he kept trying, yet the more he tried the tighter the metal got and the less air got into his lungs, which was resulting in a blurry vision and feeling lightheaded. Signs indicating that he would soon pass out. Ariscordia walked over and picked Pikachu up in her arms. The little small mouse was barely conscious as this was happening, so it had no way of protecting itself, and Ash himself would soon pass out if he continued to struggle. Ash tried to remove the piece of metal, but it wouldn't budge at all. As it grew tighter, the piece of metal was beginning to really hurt. Ariscordia then walked up to him and said as she petted Pikachu, "Before I send you back into the underworld, I'll let you watch as I make your whole world collide and shatter into billions of pieces." Ash knew he had to act fast, so he looked around for another idea that would get Pikachu out of Ariscordia's hands and to safety. He saw a light pole that had been brought down, so he turned D to the psychic powers, and as his eyes began to glow yellow, a black aura wrapped the light pole and it levitated in midair. Ash looked right at the pole and then sharply moved his gaze to Ariscordia, who so far was oblivious to the events. The pole launched quickly towards her, and just as she raised her face to look at Ash, the pole hit her right in the face. She dropped Pikachu as she fell back. He covered her face with both hands and yelled out in pain since Ash had launched the pole with full force. The piece of metal also fell off of Ash's throat, giving him the opportunity to run to Pikachu and get it to safety. Ash picked up the little mouse, and as Pikachu slowly moved its little head to look at him, it tucked its face in his arms, seeking the warmth and comfort from its trainer. Ash smiled sweetly and hugged Pikachu and said, "You okay, buddy?" "Hi." Pikachu was pretty hurt from the blast of thunder Ariscordia had hit it with, but Ash knew it would be okay after a good rest. He ran towards Brock and the others and handed Pikachu over to May. "Watch him for me, okay?" "I will. Let me take a look at, I am." Nurse Joy took Pikachu in her arms and checked it out, but before she could give him a diagnosis of Pikachu's state, a beautiful and peaceful sound was heard from every corner. The sound was not only the most beautiful choir anyone had ever seen, it was like a group of angels vocalizing in perfect harmony. The choir was an attack, one that Ariscordia knew well. As they listened in at the sound, Ash fell to his knees and covered his ears to try and block out the horrible sound. At least for him it was horrible. The bothering uncomfort brought by the sound was so much that it had Ash screeching his lungs out. Dante, CJ, Karen and Brock went over to Ash to see what was wrong, but before they could do anything, they saw Ariscordia walking slowly towards them. After several minutes, Ariscordia stopped the attack and looked at Ash, who was still on his knees covering his ears. He noticed the sound stopped and turned to look at his rival with piercing and raging eyes. He slowly rose from his knees while keeping an eye on her. The look in his eyes was nothing short of menacing and angry. The irony was that he was that furious because of the fact that she hurt Pikachu badly. Ash stood straight up, looking Ariscordia dead in the eyes as his returned to their normal brown colors. A dark aura began to form around him, and as the aura grew, the blacker it became. Then the aura shot up into the sky and formed the shape of a shadow raven. This attack was one that Ash had led off before, and a powerful one as well, although it was not as powerful as Shadow's light. The raven spread its wings and opened its beak to launch a black beam, hence the name Shadow Beam. Ariscordia lifted her right arm and pointed her index finger at Ash, and at the tip a white sphere formed and both launched their attacks at the same time. The two beams met at the middle and sort of wrestled for a few seconds, but then the energy from both beams was so much that the beams blew up and caused an explosion that sent everyone off their feet and caused all things in the area to be blown off the ground and the buildings around them to shatter. Even as everything around them was shattering, both Ash and Ariscordia stood perfectly still. This of course irritated both of them, but it got to Ariscordia more since she thought back on all her previous rivals and thought of how easily she had brought them to defeat and how hard it was to even scratch Ash. Ariscordia put both of her palms together, and both of her hands suddenly burst into flames. She then levitated high into the sky, and as the road under Ash's feet suddenly burst into flames. Officer Jenny and the others watched as the flames were engulfing Ash, but he just stood there very calmly as if nothing was happening. Ash noticed how on both sidewalks there were several fire hydrants lined up one after another. As the flames intensified, he just looked forward and a powerful flow of water busted right out from the fire hydrants, starting with the one behind Ash, and it kept going till it reached the one right behind Ariscordia. The water ran high until it was a few feet higher than Ariscordia. Once it reached its primary height, the water moved close and soon the long line of water gathered to a point and stayed there, but Ash had it rapidly shoot out at Ariscordia. The water hit her and sent her down to the street, where she hit the pavement hard and violently. The flames died down, but as soon as the water stopped flowing, the flames picked up once more, and this time they were more intense. The fire spread widely, and since Ash was in the middle of the firestorm, he couldn't get out. The fire was now getting very out of control, so Officer Jenny and the others had to back away, but they still tried to see if they could find Ash. As all in the area backed away, the fire got to the buildings on the sides and caused most of them to tumble and collapse out on the street, and there was still no sign of Ash anywhere. Ariscordia teleported to the ground several feet away from the fire and frantically looked for Ash as well. Her search would soon come to an end, for as she looked around, a path cleared right from where she was standing to the middle of the fire. At the end of the path, Ariscordia saw Ash standing there, in the middle of the fire, giving him a dark look that brought fear into her. Even though Ariscordia was an evil being, she was still a creature of the light that feared any and all darkened creatures. Ash's look was serious and very dark. He knew Ariscordia feared the darkness, so he used that against her. He began to walk towards her at a slow pace, which scared Ariscordia. Ash slowly walked up to his rival and nemesis, embracing every moment. He could virtually smell the fear Ariscordia was emitting from her, so he kept walking and looking at her dead in the eyes as he took one step after another. When he was about 10 feet from her, he changed back to his hidden form and kept walking towards her at the same pace, but with that form he scared her even more, almost to the brink of insanity. Iscordia had not felt fear like that ever since she had fought her first and real rival millennia ago. The reason why she hadn't felt that fear with any other rival was that she eliminated them before they could take their hidden form. "I've come too far to be beaten by a mere brat." A statement she screamed at herself, and therefore her morale elevated to higher levels. She was at the brink of wanting to defeat Ash no matter how. Even if it meant sending out an army out on just him. Just then an idea sparked within her, a cheat, better said. Ariscordia was too proud to admit even to herself that Ash would take an army of 50 of hers to finish him. That thought gave her an idea. There were approximately 386 Pokémon, at least discovered at the moment, so she thought to herself. Why not have all 386 Pokémon get him instead? She chuckled at the thought and backed away from Ash several feet. She tilted her head back and spread her arms and faced her palms towards the sky. Ash stopped in his tracks and tapped into Ariscordia's mind to see what she was up to. Seconds later there was a low rumbling sound. It looked like it was coming from every corner, and while Officer Jenny and all Eastanders panicked, Ash stood very still, since he now knew what his rival was up to. From the ground, shadowy figures emerged into the streets and took the shape of Pokémon. Everyone saw hundreds of Dao Pokémon sort of materializing before them. Pokémon as common as Rattatas and Wurmples and Spinnerax stood there, along with not-so-common Pokémon like Typhlosion and Charizard and Absol, and even the strange and bizarre Deoxys showed up. Soon every Pokémon known to man stood right behind Ariscordia, and on her face a smirk dominated her face. As she laughed to herself, Ash soon revealed a smirk as well. This of course puzzled Ariscordia. The smirk on her face vanished and a curious look invaded her face now. While Ariscordia was summoning her shadow Pokémon, Ash had been using a very helpful little attack. Mimic was an attack that a Pokémon could use in order to learn its opponent's attack and use it against them. Only Ariscordia could summon shadow Pokémon at will, but since Ash used Mimic, he now knew how to use Shadow Gathering. Ash vanished into thin air and then reappeared on the other side of the city street, and then seconds later that same rumbling sound they heard before the shadows appeared was heard once more. Right behind Ash several shadows appeared, but these shadows were different than the ones Ariscordia had summoned. These shadows looked more like ghosts. They were pale, see-through silver, and a white aura was around them. The ghosts were very lovely. They did not scare like the shadows Ariscordia had. Ariscordia looked in amazement at her rival, who truly proved to be one tough challenge. Both stared at each other as if reading each other's thoughts. Both stood quietly and perfectly still, but then at the same time they both yelled their orders. "Get them!" All 38. 6 shadows and all 386 ghosts ran towards each other at full speed and full force. The shadows and ghosts ran towards each, and as they met in the middle, it looked like two seas collided with one another. A blanket of black and silver crushed with full force as all Pokémon shadows and ghosts attacked each other. Meanwhile, Ash and Ariscordia took to the sky as they fired attacks such as Fire Blast, Hyper Beam, Dragon Claw, and Extreme Speed. All bystanders looked at the sky and the ground, as a war was unleashed right before their eyes. In order for Ariscordia to succeed, she needed to get Ash to Ho. his sphere in his left palm, and as he did she needed to pull off a perfect light shadow attack on Ash. As she thought of how to pull that off, Ash unleashed a powerful flamethrower that was Wida. ND came at her with full speed and force. Ariscordia flew up high and avoided the attack. She looked around for Ash but couldn't find him anywhere. She looked up at the sky and he wasn't there. She walked to the rooftops and he wasn't there either. Finally Ash appeared out of the nowhere right behind her, and he quickly pulled his left arm back, and at the palm of his hand a black sphere formed, so he quickly launched the shadow ball at her and hit her. Not only were they both able to pull off every single attack known to mankind, but they could also use other Pokemon's abilities as well. As far as Ash knew, Latios and Latias could become invisible, so he used that to his advantage. Ariscordia had not been seriously hurt. That attack was more to rattle her up and anger her, which worked like a charm. Down below, all ghosts and shadows were still at each other, but then the shadows froze and refused to move at all. Ash landed on a rooftop and looked at Ariscordia, wondering what was she going to do. Ariscordia slowly descended on the edge of the bank and spread her wings and arms. Suddenly all shadows turned to look at Officer Jenny and the others, as did Ash, to see what was going on. Suddenly the shadows ran towards Officer Jenny and the others, but they did not hesitate. Everyone released their Pokemon and made a line separating them from the shadows. Ash quickly and swiftly swiped his left claws in the air and all ghosts disappeared as he flew down to his friends. A large line of faithful and battle-ready Pokemon stood in a perfect line to make sure the shadows would not hurt their trainers. May had been asked to hold onto Ash's Pokemon, but as they laid in May's backpack, all of his Pokemon erupted from their Pokeballs. Ash had seen this coming, so he knew they would need all the help they could get, so he got Corphish, Grovyle, help out. Dante, CJ, Brock, May, Karen, Officer Jenny and Nurse Joy released all their Pokemon to help out. Karen was counting on all her Pokemon she knew Spellbound was trouble, but she would try to work things out. As her Pokemon materialized before her, she saw all of them were ready and willing to fight, even Spellbound, which surprised her. Since Spellbound barely ever listened to her, Karen kneeled beside Spellbound and tapped her small shoulder and said, "Spellbound, are you sure you want to do this?" Spellbound the Sableye smiled and nodded at its trainer, and as it agreed, Karen was struck with utmost joy and happiness. "Oh, my goodness. Thank you, Spellbound. Thank you so much." Karen hugged the small ghost and it returned the hug. Spellbound then turned to face the shadows, since it knew its trainer's life would be in danger if the shadows got near them. That of course was what made it change its mind about its trainer and decided to help her out from that point on. All of the Pokemon stared at the shadows as they came closer. They all felt fear, but they knew they had to do everything in their power to protect their trainers. Pikachu looked up and saw Ash flying down, and when he landed, Pikachu jumped up and landed on his back. As the shadows came closer, all the Pokemon unleashed their most powerful attacks they knew. And Ash also unleashed a very powerful Hyper Beam. The attacks were 100 accurate, but even with Ash's Hyper Beam, the shadows were still coming. "Oh, no. I gotta get these guys out of here, quick." Ash changed back to human form and Pikachu jumped up to his shoulder. "Everybody inside," Ash yelled as everyone, including all remaining team members. The buildings in the area consisted of a bakery, mail office, cinemas and a small dentist's office. All buildings were unlocked, of course, since Ariscordia had chased all who lived in Alexandria City, so it made it easier for everyone to find a place to hide in. Officer Jenny returned her Growlithe and said, "Get all of your Pokemon back inside the Pokeballs." They returned most of the Pokemon, but they weren't fast enough. Symphony took off, as did Ash's Tailo. Both of them, along with the help of Dante's Crobat Lestat and Karen's Crobat Akasha, they picked up some of the smaller Pokemon and flew up. Pikachu remained behind along with Ash to make sure everyone would get away safely. As they did, Ariscordia watched and made sure Ash could not get into the building by blasting a powerful Hyper Beam attack at the ground of the bank. The beam blast ed through the cement, and as it did, the building began to slowly collapse right to where Ash and Pikachu were standing. Ash looked at the street and saw everyone was already inside the building, so he grabbed Pikachu and ran towards the closet's place, which was the bakery. As he was getting near, dozens of shadows blocked him off. He snarled at them, but then he remembered that he had Pikachu in his hands, so he thought it a better idea to get away than to risk putting his Pokemon in harm's way. Ash turned around and saw more shadows behind him. Soon all the shadows had circled Ash and were ready to attack. Ash looked around for a way out and soon found it. The bank had collided on the street, but it had not fallen flat, instead it was leaning on some debris. Ash saw how some blocks of gem and were aligned in a way that it made it easy to climb up and escape by running down the collapsed building, so he ran off in that direction and evaded all the shadows before they could attack. Ash embed up as fast as he could and held onto Pikachu as tight as he could in order to prevent any harm to come to his best friend. Pikachu climbed up on Ash's shoulder and saw that the shadows stayed behind, which was weird since it figured they would be coming after them. After a long climb, Ash got to the top, but he stopped dead in his tracks, and when Pikachu looked up they saw Ariscordia standing on the edge holding an axe over her shoulders. As they looked at her, thunder struck high above in the sky and gave her an even more maddening look. Ash looked at her and could tell from the look in her eyes that she was about to do whatever it took for her to win this. Ash could tell she would not hesitate to swing that axe and hit him, so he reacted before she could. The axe being made out of metal and the fact that she was holding it up high and it was thundering gave him a rather wicked idea. Ash grabbed her right leg by the ankle, and as soon as he did, thunder came down on the axe and struck her. As Ariscordia was being shocked by the thunder, Ash pointed his left arm at the mass of shadows under him. The electricity smoothly ran through him without causing any harm, but it did hit Ariscordia and her minions quite harshly. After several minutes, Ariscordia fell to the ground and remained still as she caught her breath, but her shadow minions had been turned into dust. Ash looked over Ariscordia and noticed that Alexandria City was just a few miles off the coast, so to avoid any casualties between his friends he changed back into his hidden form and flew off in that direction. Pikachu was left behind, but it looked at Ash and wondered where he was going. Pie. Pikachu called out, but Ash was just too far to hear the little mouse calling out to him. Ariscordia got up and saw Ash running off, so she spread her wings and took off after him. Out at sea, Ash stopped and landed on a huge rock that was sticking out of the water. He had gotten at least 1.5 miles out to sea. H was all right, since what he had in mind was to keep Ariscordia away from Officer Jenny and the others. Ash looked towards the city and waited. He just waited for his rival to come to him so that they could finish this destructive feud. As Ash looked, he could see the buildings from Alexandria City. The sun was finally rising right from behind those buildings. As the sun's rays shoved themselves from the clouds and dark sky, they lit the sky up with a heavenly light that was not too bright but not so dull. As the sun slowly rose, Ash stared at it without most wonder. Yes, the brightness of the light bothered him, but it did not bother too much. As he stared at the sight, he felt the corner of his mouth rise and felt a smile. For the first time in days, he smiled for the simple pleasure of doing so. The sight before him brought a huge amount of bliss he had not felt in the past few days. The beauty before him was like a portrait. An unseen hand in the sky was striking an unseen brush to create a perfect harmony of whites, oranges, pinks and pastel reds with a few streaks of baby yellow. The bright yellow from the sun that was now over some of the smaller buildings was opening the way for the rest of the parade of colors. As the pastel orange was being pushed away to give way for the bright yellow, the rest of the colors just sort of fell into perfect harmony, turning the portrait into a masterpiece done by an unseen mystical force. Ash sighed and kept looking at the sun rising. He had never really focused on something so simple, and a part of him regretted that he never really had. It seemed as though the gift bestowed upon him opened a few extra doors in his mind he had not noticed before. Everything now seemed complicated, yet at the same time simple. All living creatures, either they were human or not, felt as if they had a little piece of wisdom to share, and he was the willing young kid listening to every whispers that could feed wisdom to him. The mixture of emotions and the adrenaline flowing throughout his entire body gave him a strange feeling. It was peaceful, but at the same time it was wild and unpredictable, something all too new for him, but he felt completely comfortable with it. As he kept admiring the sun rising, Ariscordia landed next to him and smiled wickedly as she raised her right arm and pointed her palm at him. A white sphere formed in her palm, but as she fired the attack, Ash leapt into the air. This of course agitated Ariscordia, so she flew up high as well. Both stood perfectly still and looked into each other's eyes as if they agreed to astonishing what they had started. Both backed up, and as soon as there was a wide area between them they both seemed to relax and concentrate. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen, Brock, May, Pikachu and all their Pokémon ran towards the edge of Alexandria City to witness what was happening. Ash had a black and silver mist form around him, and as this was happening the sky over him turned as black as an Umbreon's fur coat. Ariscordia had a white and silver mist form around her as well, and the sky over her was as white as an Altaria's wings. Dante and Karen and Officer Jenny gasped as they looked at Ash and Ariscordia in shock. May saw their reaction and wondered what was happening, so she walked up to Karen and asked, "Karen, what's going on? Both of them are going to launch their strongest and most destructive attacks at the same time." Brock cut in and said, "That sounds pretty dangerous." "It is, especially for both of them. If hit directly they could be brought down to their last drop of energy, and getting any energy to do much of anything would be impossible." Both Brock and May gasped, and Pikachu looked towards Ash and wished him the best of luck. Pikachu felt pretty bad that it could not be able to do anything to help its trainer out, but Pikachu had a lot of faith in him, so it smiled and watched. Out at sea the sky over them changed, the clouds began to twirl around, and in the middle there was a hole that looked like a portal to another world. A soft light of a faint gentle black color fell on Ash. The light carried several sparkles that looked like stardust. Karen smiled, and so did the others. Even though the light was black, it was still the most beautiful sight any of them had ever seen. A comforting feeling overwhelmed them as they kept looking at the gentle light that surrounded Ash. The same thing had happened to Ariscordia. The clouds above her twirled and formed a portal, and from the portal a bright white light fell on her, and just like Ash, several sparks colored black fell on her as well. This sight was also beautiful and peaceful. It was strange, both attacks were powerful and destructive, but they emitted a gentle comforting feeling that seemed to calm all who looked upon them. Ash lifted his left arm and Ariscordia lifted her right arm. Both of them launched a beam of black and white light at each other. By the time Ash and Ariscordia thought of flying away, the beams hit them both. Ash could feel the beam draining all his energy, but he knew he could not just give up. As his energy was being drained, he could not hold up his hidden form any longer, so he changed back to human form, as did Ariscordia. Ash looked down and saw the sphere and yanked it off his neck and held it tightly in his palm. Officer Jenny and the rest of the group had their complete attention on the events unfolding before them. As they kept looking, they had not noticed how the remaining team members gathered behind them to look as well. Suddenly both attacks seemed to fuse with one another and created an extremely bright light. It was so bright the onlookers had to squint their eyes in order to keep looking. Dante, Karen and Brock put their hands just above their eyebrows and looked impatiently to see who would remain standing from the two rivals. Ash felt as the light subdued, and as he opened his eyes he saw Ariscordia hugging him tightly. As the light left, it was as if life returned into his body and he could feel and see everything. Both Ash and Ariscordia were looking out into the sea, and as their cheeks met and their eyes were held active by the sunrise and stunning sea under them, they slowly turned their heads to look at each other. Once their eyes met, they stared at each other for what seemed like forever. Deep in their eyes, he knew one of them had just lost and would be gone forever. Trapped in a sphere, and their power would be a slave to the other whenever summoned. After looking into each other's eyes, they separated a few inches and looked at their hands. Ash's left hand was tightly gripping Ariscordia's right hand, and a strange black and white glow emitted from their hands. Ash lifted his gaze and looked at Ariscordia, who shed a single tear from her right eye as she lifted her gaze to look at him. Ash saw the other sphere hanging from Ariscordia's neck, so he snatched it with his right hand and inserted the SP here into his and her hands and held their hands together with his right hand. Ariscordia, now facing defeat, took her left arm and swung it around Ash's back and gave him a rather heartfelt hug. At the shore, Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, Dante, CJ, Karen, Brock, May, Pikachu and all the other Pokémon and people watched as the two rivals shared what seemed like a rather sad moment. They knew they had won, but the sight was not like anything they had expected. In truth, it was rather sad, but Ariscordia's acts were demanding of justice for all who fell under the curse of the spheres. Thousands of lives were lost over the centuries, and a single tear could not justify for all the misery and bloodshed she caused. Finally Ariscordia let go of Ash, and he let go of her hands and watched as she slowly fell towards the sea. As she fell, her entire body lit in a beautiful and peaceful white light that seemed to engulf her. Ash had also let go of the spheres so they could fuse together and finish swallowing Ariscordia into her prison, which would now be her home for the rest of eternity. Both the white sphere and black sphere had fused together to create a stunningly beautiful silver sphere which swallowed Ariscordia into it as they both fell into the sea. Inches before hitting the water, Ariscordia had been fully engulfed by the silver sphere and it went into the water. Ash changed form and flew down after the silver sphere. He dove into the water and went after it. Pikachu, May, Karen and Brock walked closer to the edge and waited impatiently to see when Ash would come back up. As the Seiko NDS passed, they became very uneasy and worried. They all stared into the waves as they crashed into the sandy shore and left a dying impression into the wet sand. Suddenly Ash flew right out of the water. And as he flapped his massive wings, he slowly landed on the ground right in front of the group. Ash changed back into human form and stood there quietly and looking down at the ground. Slowly he lifted his face and looked at his friends. They were startled by his eyes since they were burning with a silver glow. They settled down as the glow lifted and his eyes returned to their normal soft brown color. They also noticed that around his neck was a black string and at the end of it was a beautiful silver sphere. Pikachu looked at Ash and then ran towards his trainer, leapt into his arms and hugged him tightly. Ash was somewhat unemotional for a few seconds, but then he smiled sweetly and returned a heartfelt hug. May, Karen and everyone else ran towards Ash to greet the winner. It was true, Ash had won. He saved not only a city and a town but also the entire world from total destruction, but deep inside he felt somewhat terrible and sad. As the voices from his friends overlapped and seemed to grow louder, he retreated into the back of his mind and thought for several minutes. Finally he came to a conclusion that would rid him of that terrible burning feeling inside of him. Well, we should return back to Northbridge. Dr. Marco will want to hear the good news, Officer Jenny said as she smiled. Everyone agreed except for Ash, who remained silent and walked away from the group. He walked towards the edge of the shore and looked to where the heavens and earth met. The group fell silent and looked at Ash, wondering why he was acting that way. After all, they did win the battle. Hey, guys, Ash said after standing there quietly for several minutes. Can you give me a few minutes, please? They all looked at each other and then back at Ash, wondering what he was going to do. Brock spoke out and said as he smiled. Sure. Come on, you guys. The group left and Ash turned his attention to the enchanting sea behind him. Ash slowly lowered his gaze and closed was still on his shoulder. Looked at him but remained perfectly silent. Ash remained just as silent and still. He almost seemed like a statue overlooking all who sailed in the waters. Suddenly the wind picked up wildly and blew powerfully. Pikachu almost lost its grip and fell off of Ash's shoulder, but Ash just kept perfectly still. The wind kept blowing and as it raced past Ash it made the overcoat dance wildly. As H's dark look seemed ethereal and almost celestial, like a dark angel sent to bring peace and hope to all for all of his wrongful actions. Seconds later the deep silence was broken when the voice of a small child was heard from Ash's left side. I always thought you'd know better. As the small child's voice spoke, Ash could feel something very cold touch his left hand. He slowly opened his eyes and saw a small apparition resembling a girl around Max's age standing next to him, holding his hand in her small hand. The small girl was Ariscordia when she was just a little girl. She was wearing a WHITE cloaked robe like the one from the picture in Dr. Marco's house. Ariscordia's face shone with a radiant glow of pure innocence that was not there before. Her smile was sweet and her eyes were full of joy. The same joy you would find in any happy child. The minute I looked into your eyes I saw the purest heart since Thanades. He was always kind to me and treated me nicely. Thanades was very dark, but he was the gentlest and kindest person to walk the earth, just like you, Ash. Ash laughed in a shy manner and put his hand behind his head as he sort of blushed from the compliment and said, Me? Nah, sure you are. I know so. Isn't that right, Pikachu? Pikachu lifted its paw in the air and agreed with Ariscordia by shrilling out. Pikachu. Hi, Pikachu. See. Ash smiled sweetly and then kneeled down right next to Ariscordia. She quickly jumped into his arms and hugged him sweetly. Ash returned the hug while Pikachu jumped in to hug both as well and smiled at the former rivals. I knew I was right. said Ariscordia as she placed her hand right on Ash's heart and whispered a familiar line. In the middle of darkness there's a light. Ash couldn't help but smile again, and so did Ariscordia and Pikachu. Oh, I almost forgot. I have a gift for you. Ariscordia stretched her arm out, and when she opened her small hand, a small, starry white orb levitated in the middle of her right palm. Ash looked at the orb and then at Ariscordia in curiosity. Huh, I want you to wield the power of the light. Then you will have complete control over the light and the darkness. Aris, I can't. Think of it as a thank you for setting me free gift. Deep inside, Ash did not want to part Ariscordia from her powers that had been bestowed onto her, but she was giving them to her in good faith. After thinking it over, Ash slowly lifted his left arm, and as soon as their palms came together, Ariscordia transmitted all of her powers onto Ash. Most people don't realize it, but darkness is not a force of evilness. The darkness is every huge and little challenge given to us by fate. Sadly, those who fail to pass a challenge consider it bad. Truth be told, you cannot live without the light or the darkness. You need both in order to have a perfect balance. That's true, said Ash as he petted Pikachu. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting you, Ash Ketchum. Same here. Hi, Pikachu. Agreed little yellow mouse as it lifted its paw in the air. Ariscordia smiled at Pikachu and turned to face the sea. The small apparition began to vanish, but before it completely vanished she turned to look at Ash and said with a huge smile. I meant what I said earlier. Nice outfit, Azriel. For a split second Ash was oblivious to what she had said, but then he looked at himself and laughed, realizing why she had said that. Seconds from vanishing, Ariscordia winked at Ash and finally vanished from the realm of the living to rest once and for all. Later that day around noon, the citizens of Alexandria City and Northbridge Town got together to celebrate how a courageous young trainer saved them. After a lot of drinking, partying and much eating, Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy and Dr. Marco called the group over to speak about Ash's new situation. Dr. Marco walked over to Ash and placed his massive hand on his shoulder and said with a huge smile. Well, after talking it over, we have decided that Ash seems fit to release out into the world. He's no threat to anyone and he did save us all. After Marco said that, Officer Jenny and Nurse Joy agreed. Ash proved to be more than capable to control his gift. And they knew he was a kind heart with not one shred of evil in him. After staying for just a few more minutes, Ash, Pikachu, Brock, May and Max said their goodbyes and made their way towards Northbridge Valley. As soon as they set foot on the valley, they heard someone calling out to them. The group turned around to see who it was, and it turned out to be Karen, Dante and CJ. Glad we caught you guys before you left, said Karen as she tried to catch her breath. We were wondering something. Back there at the cliff, you asked us to give you a moment. You never told anyone anything, but we know what you did. Yeah, very cool indeed, kid, said Dante as he crossed his arms, and CJ agreed as well. Ash lifted an eyebrow in question and said, but how? Karen smiled at Dante and CJ and said, oh, a little Crobat told us. Plus we figured you had figured it out as well when you first touched the sphere, said CJ with a confident smile. May on the other hand had absolutely no idea what they meant by that, so she stepped forward and asked, what do you guys mean? I let Aris go. You what? Yelled Brock, May and Max at the same time, but Ash explained why he had done that. Of course Karen, Dante and CJ already knew why, so they let him do the explaining. Relax, you guys. I freed Aris from the curse. See, their dad was half right. Aris was cruel and bitter, but that was before those witch doctors had placed the curse. The war was not because of the land, they had worked that out through an agreement. The war was really all about who would be the next heir to the throne. Both civilizations had joined to form one, but both had 2 kings and 2 heirs, so when each wanted their kids to take the throne, a war was spilled over. Makes sense, said Brock, and Max agreed. Yeah, Oh, both of their parents turned to their own witch doctors, and they were the ones who gave them the gifts, and it was them who placed the curse. It wasn't Aris, she was just another victim just like Thanades. But then why does everyone think she is evil, and why hasn't anyone corrected this? Asked May, who was not placing it all together as neatly as the rest were. Karen, who all this time had her NDS behind her back, showed them what looked like a very old letter. Karen faced the written part towards Ash and the others and said, because we were told not to say anything until she was set free. You see, our great-grandmother found a set of letters all addressed to Thanades and one addressed to whoever it may concern. Both Aris and Thanades wrote this particular letter explaining how the war started and why it did. Oh, and the letters Aris wrote to Thanades explained that both of them were friends, not enemies. They just tried to end the war but in the end failed. Oh, poor Aris, said May in a sympathetic tone which everyone else agreed to. Suddenly Brock got an idea in his head and looked at Ash curiously and said, "So, we know Karen, Dante and CJ knew the truth about Aris and Thanades, but how did you know?" Ash smiled wittingly and said as he looked at the letter in Karen's arms. "While we were out there in the sea pulling off the attacks, she told me. Not in words though. She shed a single tear and somehow I saw what really happened in that tear. I guess she was saving it till the end. Seems like she always leaves it till the end, but then none of the other Nades seemed to have understood, so she did what she had to in order to survive. So in a way ya did the right thing, Ketchum," Dante said as back and everyone else agreed, including Pikachu. Ash smiled and said, "So, guys, what are you gonna do from here on out?" "Well," began to say Dante, but then he was cut off by an anxious Karen with some good news. "Well, I am off to start on my own journey. That is like so wicked. Dad saw how Spellbound began to trust me and he kept his promise." "Hey, that's great. Maybe we'll run into each other," said Ash, followed by a reply from Pikachu. Pikachu, "Yeah, that'd be great." They wished Karen the best of luck and they all continued on their own paths. After crossing Northbridge Valley, which took a while, Ash and the others came face to face with the gorge. "Well, this is it. Let's go, guys," said Brock as he walked in first, followed by Max, who said, "Too bad you guys didn't catch any new Pokemon." "Well, in a sense Ash is a Pokemon. But, I wonder if he would be considered a legendary," said May as she laughed and kept walking down the gorge, but Ash quickly said, "Hey, we're getting just a little too ahead of ourselves." The group of kids laughed and so did Pikachu. The little yellow mouse jumped off of Ash's shoulder and walked ahead of Ash. As Ash was going to set foot on the rocky path of the gorge, he heard the faint sound of children laughing. He slowly turned around and a few feet away were two small apparitions. One was Ariscordia, who was holding hands with a small boy who Ash thought to be Thanades. Both apparitions were holding hands and waving at Ash. Ash smiled and watched as the two apparitions vanished into thin air. After they were gone, he kept walking down the gorge and on with his journey. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you all are enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget to support author of this fanfic. So let's end this video here. Until then, see you in next video. Okay, Torchic, as soon as they hit the bars I want you T.